There are storms that rip roofs from houses. And then there are storms that never touch the sky. They happen quietly. One lie, one signature, one decision made in anger. And before anyone realizes it, a home still stands, but the family inside it has already collapsed. Imagine spending years planting a beautiful garden with someone you love, only to wake up one morning and discover that the person holding the watering can has been pouring poison into the roots, or at least, that's what you've been convinced to believe. Now, imagine learning far too late that the poison was never in the garden. It was in the voice whispering beside you all along. What would you do if the person you trusted most convinced you to destroy the one person who never stopped believing in you? Would you be able to live with yourself? Tonight's story isn't simply about wealth, betrayal, or revenge. It's about something far more dangerous. The quiet arrogance of believing certainty is the same as truth. Because love doesn't usually die in one dramatic moment. It dies in unanswered questions. In conversations, we postpone. In assumptions, we mistake for facts. And sometimes it dies the day we stop giving the people we love the chance to explain themselves. Welcome back to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. If you love heartfelt stories that entertain while leaving you with meaningful lessons about life, love, trust, and second chances, you're in the right place. Take a moment to subscribe, turn on notifications, and become part of our growing family. Every story here is written to touch your heart and give you something worth thinking about long after the video ends. Now, before we begin, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been judged before anyone asked for your side of the story? Or maybe you've trusted the wrong person and realized it only after the damage was already done. If that's happened to you, let us know in the comments. Your story might encourage someone else who's carrying the same invisible weight. Tonight's journey reminds us of a truth many people learn too late. Power can buy influence. Money can buy comfort. Success can buy admiration. But none of them can buy back trust once you've destroyed it. This is the story of a billionaire who believed another woman's lies over his own wife's honesty. He thought he was protecting himself. Instead, he became the architect of his own downfall. He watched the woman who had stood beside him in his darkest years leave in handcuffs because he chose suspicion over conversation. Months later, when those prison gates finally opened and she stepped back into the sunlight, she walked out carrying nothing but a small duffel bag. While the man who had once owned skyscrapers, luxury cars, private jets, and a billion-dollar empire stood surrounded by losses that no amount of money could ever repair. Because sometimes the richest person in the room is the poorest where it matters most. And sometimes the person who loses everything is the only one who finally discovers who they really are. This isn't just a story about a marriage that fell apart. It's about the price of pride, the danger of manipulation, the courage it takes to rebuild after betrayal, and the kind of love that doesn't ask someone to be perfect, only honest. So, settle in, because the lesson hidden inside this story may change the way you look at trust forever. The iron gates groaned open with the slow reluctance of something that had watched too many people leave carrying invisible scars. Maya Caldwell stepped into the cool Chicago morning, with a small canvas duffel bag hanging from one shoulder. Everything she owned fit inside it. 2 changes of clothes, a worn notebook filled with handwritten thoughts, a family photograph with faded edges, and a paperback novel another inmate had insisted she keep. The guards called her name one final time. She turned, nodded politely, and walked forward without looking back. Not because prison hadn't changed her, because she already knew she couldn't change what had happened inside those walls. The sunlight rested gently against her face, warmer than she remembered. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, breathing deeply, almost as if she had forgotten what freedom smelled like. Fresh pavement after last night's rain. Coffee drifting from a nearby cafe. Traffic humming through downtown streets. Life had continued without asking whether she was ready to rejoin it. For a few quiet seconds, she simply stood there. Freedom wasn't the opposite of prison. Freedom was learning how to breathe without asking permission. Across the street, a black luxury sedan remained parked beneath the shade of an old oak tree. Inside sat Ethan Caldwell. Once celebrated as one of America's youngest self-made billionaires, Ethan barely recognized the tired man staring back at him from the rearview mirror. His expensive tailored suit hung looser than it used to. Dark circles rested beneath eyes that hadn't known restful sleep in months. His beard, once carefully maintained, had begun showing streaks of grey that hadn't existed a year earlier. The headlines had called him brilliant, visionary, untouchable. Now they called him reckless, naive. The billionaire whose empire collapsed almost as quickly as it had risen. None of those headlines mentioned the truth that haunted him every morning. His greatest mistake wasn't losing billions of dollars. It was losing the only person who had loved him before any of the money existed. He watched Maya emerge through the prison gates. She looked thinner, Stronger somehow. Not physically. There was a quiet steadiness in the way she walked. She no longer carried herself like someone waiting for permission to exist. Ethan instinctively reached for the door handle. His hand stopped halfway. What exactly was he planning to say? "I'm sorry?" Those two words felt painfully inadequate. Sorry couldn't erase handcuffs. Sorry couldn't return birthdays she had missed. Sorry couldn't silence the nightmares she would probably carry for years. Some mistakes didn't disappear because the guilty person finally understood them. Across the street, Maya noticed the familiar black sedan. She recognized it immediately. For just a heartbeat, her eyes met Ethan's through the windshield. Neither smiled. Neither waved. There was no anger in Maya's expression. That somehow hurt Ethan even more. Hatred would have meant he still occupied space in her heart. What he saw instead was acceptance. The kind that arrives only after countless nights of grieving someone who is still alive. She looked away first, then continued walking. No hesitation, no dramatic confrontation, no speech. Just another step toward a life that no longer included him. Ethan remained frozen behind the steering wheel until she disappeared around the corner. His phone vibrated. It was another message from his attorney. Urgent. The board has voted. Your resignation is effective immediately. He stared at the screen. Months earlier, news like this would have sent him into crisis mode. Now, he simply locked the phone. Some losses stopped surprising you after enough had accumulated. 3 years earlier, Monday mornings inside Caldwell Capital usually began with confidence. Employees moved quickly through the marble lobby carrying coffee cups and tablet computers. Elevators opened and closed with mechanical precision. Television screens displayed stock prices climbing higher. Everything looked successful. Everything sounded successful. Everything appeared exactly the way success was supposed to look. Yet on the top floor, inside a glass office overlooking the Chicago skyline, Ethan Caldwell sat alone long after everyone else had started working. His untouched coffee had already gone cold. The city below pulsed with endless movement. Construction cranes swung through the air. Yellow taxis flowed between intersections. Thousands of strangers hurried toward destinations that somehow seemed clearer than his own. His executive assistant knocked softly. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell. Your 8 o'clock board meeting starts in 10 minutes. "Thank you." She hesitated. "Would you like me to bring fresh coffee?" He looked down at the untouched mug. "No, this one's fine." It wasn't. Neither was he. The strange thing about emotional exhaustion was how invisible it looked from the outside. Ethan still arrived early, still closed multi-million-dollar deals, still smiled during interviews, still donated millions to charities, still appeared on magazine covers celebrating his leadership. People admired the life he had built. Very few noticed the man quietly disappearing inside it. Years earlier, success had been a dream. Now it had become an obligation he no longer knew how to put down. His father had spent 35 years working in a steel factory before dying 2 months after retirement. Growing up, Ethan learned a simple lesson. Work harder, earn more, stay in control. Everything else will take care of itself. It was a lesson that built his fortune. It was also the lesson slowly dismantling his marriage. His phone buzzed again. This time, the screen displayed one word. Maya. A small smile finally appeared. She rarely called during work hours unless something mattered. He answered immediately. "Hey." Her voice was warm, though slightly tired. "Did you remember what tonight is?" Ethan frowned. Silence stretched for 2 uncomfortable seconds. He searched his calendar mentally. Board meeting. Investor dinner. Conference call with Singapore. Quarterly projections. Nothing else surfaced. Then, he heard her soft exhale. "You forgot." His stomach tightened. "Our anniversary dinner." He closed his eyes. 10 years. He had forgotten their 10th wedding anniversary dinner. Maya. "It's okay." "No, it isn't. I know you're busy. I can move the meeting." "You've already moved our dinner twice." There was no accusation in her voice. Only disappointment. Sometimes disappointment weighed far more than anger. "I'll fix it," Ethan said quickly. "You don't have to fix it." "What do you mean?" "I just wanted you to remember." The line remained quiet. Finally she spoke again. "I'll see you tonight." The call ended. Ethan stared at the blank screen. Somewhere deep inside, he recognized a painful truth. She hadn't sounded angry because she had grown used to being forgotten. That realization unsettled him far more than an argument ever could. Outside his office, the city continued moving exactly as it always had. Inside, for the first time in a long while, Ethan wondered whether the empire he spent every day protecting had quietly begun costing him the one relationship that had once made building it worthwhile. He didn't know it yet. But the cracks appearing in his marriage weren't about missed dinners or forgotten anniversaries. They were the first tiny fractures in a foundation that would soon bring everything crashing down. The rain had stopped just before sunset, leaving Chicago washed clean beneath streaks of gold and amber light. Maya stood in the kitchen of their penthouse apartment, carefully placing 2 white plates on the dining table. Candles flickered softly between them, and a small bouquet of fresh lilies sat in the center. The same flowers Ethan had brought her on their first anniversary, back when he still remembered details without needing reminders. She glanced at the clock. 7 o'clock. Their reservation had been for 6:30, but after Ethan forgot, she decided to prepare dinner at home instead. She wasn't trying to impress him. She simply wasn't ready to let 10 years of marriage pass like any other Tuesday. She checked her phone. No message, no call. Only an email from one of the young attorneys she supervised at the non-profit legal center, thanking her for helping win a housing case for a struggling family. A faint smile crossed her face. Helping people had never made headlines the way Ethan's billion-dollar acquisitions did, but it gave her something success alone never could. A quiet sense that someone's life was better because she had shown up. She poured 2 glasses of sparkling water and sat alone at the table. The apartment was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lake Michigan. Original paintings decorated the walls. Furniture, imported from Italy, filled every room. Yet none of it could soften the silence that had slowly become a permanent guest in their home. Her grandmother used to tell her, "A house can echo even when 2 people live inside it." As a child, Maya never understood those words. Now she lived inside them. Across town, Ethan remained seated in the boardroom. Numbers filled the giant presentation screen. Profits, forecasts, acquisitions, market expansion. Every executive around the table seemed energized. Only Ethan looked exhausted. "We can close the Denver deal by Friday," one director said. Another executive nodded. "If we move quickly, we'll eliminate our biggest competitor before the end of the quarter." Everyone looked toward Ethan. Normally, he would have answered immediately. Instead, his eyes drifted toward the window. His anniversary. He had promised himself he would leave by 6. Then another meeting appeared. Then another problem. Then another decision only he could supposedly make. Success had become a machine that always demanded 1 more hour. 1 more meeting. 1 more sacrifice. "Ethan?" He blinked. "I'm sorry," he said. "Could you repeat that?" Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Their CEO almost never lost focus. "We were waiting for your approval." He looked at the documents. For the first time in years they seemed strangely unimportant. "Let's continue tomorrow." Silence filled the room. "Tomorrow?" someone asked. "Yes." "But the investors, they'll still be there tomorrow." Without another word, Ethan gathered his briefcase and walked out. No one followed him. By the time Ethan reached the apartment, it was nearly 9. He quietly unlocked the front door. The candles had burned halfway down. Dinner sat untouched. Maya was washing dishes. "You didn't have to clean up," he said softly. Without turning around, she answered, "The food was getting cold." "I'm sorry." "I know. I really am." She dried her hands and faced him. There was no anger in her expression. That worried him. Arguments could be repaired. Indifference was much harder. "How was your meeting?" she asked. "It could have waited." "But it didn't." He lowered his eyes. "No." She walked toward the dining table and gently picked up the bouquet of lilies. "They're beautiful." "I didn't buy those." "I know. They're from last week." She smiled sadly. "I was remembering the first anniversary." Ethan looked around the apartment. He suddenly noticed things he hadn't paid attention to in months. The framed photographs, their wedding picture, vacation souvenirs from New Orleans, Seattle, and Napa Valley. A bookshelf Maya had filled with novels he kept promising to read. Somewhere along the way, their memories had become decorations instead of experiences they continued building together. "I've been failing you," he admitted quietly. Maya took a slow breath. "I don't think you've been failing me." "No? I think you've been forgetting us." Her words landed harder than any accusation. She wasn't questioning his love. She was questioning his attention. There was a difference. "I keep telling myself all this work is for our future," Ethan said. "And when does our future arrive?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because he didn't know. There was always another goal, another investment, another company to acquire, another mountain to climb. He had become so focused on building tomorrow that he rarely lived today. "I miss you," Maya whispered. The simplicity of those 3 words broke something inside him. Not because they sounded dramatic, because they sounded honest. He stepped closer. "So do I." "You're standing right here," she said. "I know. But sometimes you're still somewhere else." Neither of them spoke for several moments. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy. The kind of silence that carries everything people have been too tired to say. Finally, Maya reached for his hand. I'm not asking you to give up your career. I know. I'm asking you to stop treating our marriage like it can survive on leftovers. He squeezed her hand gently. It deserves more than what's left after work. Exactly. He nodded slowly. I can do better. She looked into his eyes. I hope so. She wanted to believe him. She truly did. But hope had become something she handled carefully, like fragile glass. Promises were easy. Consistency was rare. The following morning, Maya arrived at the legal aid center before anyone else. She unlocked the office, switched on the lights, and placed fresh coffee in the break room. Within an hour, the waiting area filled with clients facing eviction notices, employment disputes, and family court hearings. One elderly man nervously approached her desk. I can't afford an attorney, he said. You don't have to, Maya replied warmly. Let's start by hearing your story. She listened, without interrupting. She asked thoughtful questions. She never rushed people simply because they couldn't pay. Watching her work, the younger attorneys often wondered how she remained so patient. The answer was simple. She believed everyone deserved to be heard before being judged. It was a principle that guided every case she accepted. Ironically, it was the very principle her own marriage would soon be tested against. At Caldwell Capital, Ethan's assistant entered his office carrying the day's schedule. You have lunch with the Chamber of Commerce. He nodded. Then an interview with Business Weekly. He nodded again. And this afternoon, you'll be meeting Vanessa Hart. Ethan looked up. Vanessa Hart? She'll be consulting on the Horizon International merger. The name stirred memories he hadn't visited in years. College classrooms, late-night study sessions, dreams shared over cheap coffee. Vanessa had been brilliant, ambitious, and fiercely competitive. After graduation, their paths separated. He built Caldwell Capital. She became one of the country's most sought-after corporate strategists. I didn't realize she was leading the project, Ethan said. His assistant smiled. Apparently, she specifically requested to work with you. Ethan leaned back in his chair. A coincidence, he thought. Nothing more. He had no idea that a single name on his calendar was about to become the first domino in a chain of events that would destroy everything he believed could never be taken from him. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like someone you loved was slowly drifting away? Not because they stopped loving you, but because life quietly took their attention somewhere else. Sometimes, relationships don't fall apart because of one big mistake. They crumble through the little moments we ignore, the conversations we postpone, and the promises we keep saying we'll make time for tomorrow. If you've ever experienced that, share your thoughts in the comments. Your story could remind someone that it's never too early to choose communication over silence. And if you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter. Trust me, you won't believe what happens when a woman from Ethan's past walks back into his life. One unexpected meeting is about to set off a chain of events that will change every life in this story forever. The following Thursday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made downtown Chicago feel alive. From the windows of Caldwell Capital's headquarters, the city looked unstoppable. Cars streamed through busy intersections, the elevated trains rattled overhead, and the sidewalks overflowed with professionals chasing deadlines. Ethan stood in his office, absent-mindedly straightening his tie as he reviewed the morning's agenda. His assistant knocked lightly before entering. Miss Hart has arrived. Ethan nodded. Send her in. A few seconds later, the office door opened. Vanessa Hart walked in, with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years proving she belonged in rooms where few women were welcomed. She wore a charcoal grey business suit, carried a leather portfolio beneath one arm, and greeted Ethan with an easy smile. It's been a long time. It has, Ethan replied, extending his hand. She looked around the office before shaking it. I remember when your entire company fit inside a rented workspace with peeling paint. Ethan laughed. I try not to remember that office. I don't. It reminds me how far you've come. There was no flirtation in her voice, only familiarity. They spent the next hour discussing the Horizon International merger, a deal that could expand Caldwell Capital into several new international markets. Vanessa was prepared. Every chart, projection, and recommendation had been carefully researched. She challenged Ethan's assumptions without trying to impress him. By the end of the meeting, he understood why her reputation had become legendary. You've always been this organized, he said. She smiled. I've always hated walking into meetings unprepared. So have I. For a brief moment, they both remembered the college library where they had spent countless evenings studying together. Life had taken them in different directions, but success had shaped them in surprisingly similar ways. As Vanessa packed her portfolio, she noticed a framed wedding photograph on Ethan's desk. "You married Maya." "I did. I remember meeting her once." "You probably don't." "I do," Vanessa replied. "She was kind." Ethan smiled. "She still is." "That's rare." He looked at the photograph for a moment longer than he realized. "It is." Vanessa noticed something else. He smiled at the picture. But it wasn't the smile of a man completely at peace. It was quieter, almost nostalgic. As she left the office, she tucked that observation away. Not every crack in a foundation is visible at first glance. Sometimes all it takes is knowing where to look. That evening, Maya sat across from a young couple inside one of the non-profit's small conference rooms. The husband had recently lost his job. Medical bills had piled up. Their landlord had filed for eviction. The wife fought back tears as she apologized for crying. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Everything feels like it's falling apart." Maya handed her a tissue. "You don't have to apologize. I feel like we've failed." "No," Maya said gently. "You're facing something difficult. Those aren't the same thing." The couple listened quietly. "My grandmother used to tell me that hard seasons reveal what kind of people we choose to become. They don't decide it for us." The husband looked at his wife and squeezed her hand. For the first time since entering the office, both of them smiled. After they left, one of the younger attorneys approached Maya. "How do you always know what to say?" Maya laughed softly. "I usually don't. It never looks that way. I've learned that most people don't need perfect advice." "They don't? They need someone willing to listen before trying to solve them." The younger attorney nodded thoughtfully. Maya returned to her desk. Without realizing it, she practiced that same patience in every part of her life, including a marriage that had recently begun asking more from her than she knew how to give. Later that night, Ethan arrived home earlier than usual. Maya looked up from the novel she had been reading. "You're home before 8. "I figured I should surprise my wife." She smiled. "I like this version of you." He loosened his tie as they settled onto the living room sofa. "I met someone today." "Oh?" "Vanessa Hart." Maya searched her memory. "The consultant? My college friend. The one who worked on those startup competitions with you?" He looked surprised. "You remember? You've mentioned her before." "She's helping with the Horizon merger." Maya nodded. "Is she good?" "The best." "I'm glad." There was no jealousy in her voice, no suspicion. She trusted Ethan. Not because she believed he was incapable of making mistakes, because trust had always been a choice she renewed every day. She believed marriage couldn't survive if every unfamiliar name became a reason to worry. Ethan appreciated that about her. He just didn't say it often enough. Instead, he rested his head against the back of the sofa. "I'm tired." Maya closed her book. "Work?" He hesitated. "Life." She reached over and took his hand. "You don't have to carry everything by yourself." He looked at their intertwined fingers. "I know." But deep down, he wasn't sure he actually believed it. Ever since he built Caldwell Capital, he had convinced himself that asking for help was a sign of weakness. The company depended on him. The investors depended on him. Hundreds of employees depended on him. Somewhere along the way, he started believing his family should expect less from him simply because everyone else expected so much. Maya leaned against his shoulder. Neither of them spoke. Sometimes love looked exactly like this. Not grand gestures. Not expensive gifts. Just two tired people sharing the same silence. Outside, the city lights shimmered across Lake Michigan. Inside, neither of them noticed how quietly another story had already begun. One that would test not only their marriage, but everything they believed about trust, loyalty, and the dangerous power of believing appearances over truth. The Horizon International merger quickly became the largest project Caldwell Capital had handled in nearly 5 years. For Ethan, it meant earlier mornings, longer meetings, and flights to New York, Boston, and San Francisco that blurred together until hotel rooms all looked the same. For Maya, it meant eating dinner alone more often than she cared to admit. She never complained. Instead, she filled the quiet hours with work at the Legal Aid Center, evening jogs along the lakefront, and phone calls to her mother every Sunday afternoon. Their marriage wasn't unhappy. It was simply growing quieter, and silence, when left unattended, often became the easiest place for misunderstanding to settle. 3 weeks after joining the project, Vanessa had earned the respect of nearly every executive at Caldwell Capital. She challenged bad ideas without embarrassing people. She worked late without expecting praise. She noticed details others overlooked. Even Ethan found himself relying on her more than he expected. One afternoon, after a meeting with international investors, Vanessa stopped outside Ethan's office. "You skipped lunch again." He glanced at the untouched sandwich sitting on his desk. "I wasn't hungry." "You said the same thing yesterday." I've been busy. She folded her arms. You know, that's exactly what you used to say in college. He laughed. And you used to force me to eat. For the first time in weeks, Ethan laughed without thinking about work. Several employees walking past the office noticed. It wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't romantic. It was simply easy. Vanessa recognized something important in that moment. Ethan carried pressure like a man who believed resting was irresponsible. People like that didn't need someone who praised them. They needed someone who made them feel understood. She quietly decided to become that person. That evening, Maya waited outside the non-profit building as rain began falling across the city. She searched her purse for an umbrella. I think you're looking for this. She turned. Daniel Brooks stood beside her, holding a large navy blue umbrella. He volunteered at the center twice each week, helping teenagers prepare for high school equivalency exams. Oh, Maya said with a smile. Thank you. I noticed you forgot yours this morning. You remembered? I teach middle school. He shrugged. Remembering forgotten things is part of the job. They laughed together as they walked toward the parking lot. Daniel wasn't trying to impress her. He simply enjoyed conversation. My students asked me something impossible today. What was it? One of them wanted to know why adults pretend everything is okay. Maya smiled. What did you tell them? I said, adults don't always pretend. They're just afraid of worrying the people they love. She looked at him thoughtfully. That's actually a very good answer. He smiled. My students didn't think so. Why not? They said, if people love each other, they should tell the truth. Maya looked out through the falling rain. Children often reduced complicated problems to surprisingly simple truths. I think your students might be wiser than most adults. Daniel laughed. They usually are. As they reached her car, he handed her the umbrella. You keep it. I'll give it back next week. No rush. She thanked him and drove home, unaware that their brief conversation would remain in her thoughts for the rest of the evening. Not because she felt attracted to Daniel, because his student's question had quietly unsettled her. Why do adults pretend everything is okay? She wondered whether she and Ethan had been doing exactly that. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan and Vanessa reviewed financial projections in the executive conference room. Stacks of reports covered the table. Most employees had already gone home. Vanessa rubbed her tired eyes. We've been staring at numbers for 4 hours. Ethan leaned back. I didn't realize it was that late. She smiled. You rarely do. He looked toward the empty hallway outside. The building's almost deserted. Vanessa closed her laptop. You know something? What? When people become successful, everyone starts assuming they never get tired. Ethan looked at her. I've noticed. But you're human. So are you. She nodded. Exactly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she asked quietly, how's Maya? He smiled faintly. She's good. You don't sound convinced. It's not that. What is it? He hesitated. We've both been busy. Vanessa nodded as though she completely understood. That happens. I keep thinking things will slow down. And do they? He smiled without humor. No. She didn't criticize him. She didn't defend Maya. She simply listened. Sometimes, people became attached to whoever made them feel heard. Vanessa understood that better than most. As they gathered their things, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was a message from Maya. Hope you're having a good day. Don't forget to eat dinner tonight. Love you. A smile crossed his face. Vanessa noticed it. Your wife? He nodded. She reminds me to eat more than my doctor does. Sounds like someone who really cares. She does. Vanessa looked away for a moment before replying. Don't take that for granted. Her words sounded sincere. They were. But sincerity and intention are not always the same thing. A few days later, Ethan arrived at work unusually early. His assistant met him outside the elevator. Good morning. Morning. I wanted to let you know there was an issue overnight. What kind of issue? The accounting department noticed a discrepancy in one of the Horizon expense reports. How serious? We're still investigating. Ethan frowned. Could it be fraud? We honestly don't know yet. Who had access to the files? She checked her tablet. Several departments. He nodded. Let me know as soon as you have answers. As she walked away, Vanessa stepped out of the adjacent hallway. I heard. So did everyone else, apparently. She gave a sympathetic smile. These things are usually simple mistakes. I hope so. She paused before speaking again. Still. What? It's probably best not to assume anything until all the facts are in. He nodded. Agreed. Neither of them realized that somewhere inside the company's financial records, Someone had already begun arranging a puzzle whose pieces would eventually point toward the last person Ethan ever imagined he would question. And once doubt finds a place to take root, it rarely announces how far it intends to grow. The discrepancy in the Horizon International accounts should have taken a few hours to explain. Instead, it lingered for days. Then, another irregularity surfaced. A vendor payment had been approved twice. A confidential financial report had been accessed after business hours. None of the issues alone seemed alarming. Together, however, they created an uncomfortable pattern. Ethan stood in the executive conference room as the company's chief financial officer projected spreadsheets across the large screen. "We're not saying anyone has committed fraud," the CFO clarified. "We're saying we need to understand why these transactions don't match." "Who had access?" Ethan asked. "The executive finance team, outside consultants, and legal compliance." Vanessa quietly studied the documents without interrupting. The room remained silent. Finally, she spoke. "Before anyone starts pointing fingers, let's remember that data rarely tells the whole story." Several executives nodded. Ethan appreciated her calm approach. It was exactly the kind of level-headed leadership he admired. The meeting ended with more questions than answers. As everyone filed out, Ethan remained behind, staring at the highlighted transactions. Something felt wrong. He just couldn't explain why. Across town, Maya spent the afternoon helping a single mother prepare for a custody hearing. The woman was overwhelmed. "They already think I'm a bad parent," she said through tears. "They've made up their minds." Maya leaned forward gently. "Never assume someone has already decided your future." "But what if they have? Then we keep presenting the truth." The woman looked down. "What if the truth isn't enough?" Maya smiled softly. "The truth doesn't always win immediately." She paused. "But it deserves someone willing to defend it." Those words came naturally. They reflected everything Maya believed about justice. Every person deserved to be heard. Every accusation deserved evidence. Every conclusion deserved patience. She had no idea how painfully those beliefs would soon be tested in her own life. That evening, Ethan arrived home carrying takeout from Maya's favorite Italian restaurant. "I come in peace," he joked as he walked through the front door. Maya laughed from the kitchen. "That's a promising start." They ate together on the balcony overlooking the city. For the first time in weeks, neither of them checked a phone. The conversation drifted from work to old memories. They laughed about their tiny first apartment with unreliable heating. They remembered the road trip where Ethan accidentally drove 3 hours in the wrong direction because he refused to admit he was lost. "You were impossible," Maya teased. "I was confident. You were stubborn. Those aren't the same thing." "They are when you're wrong." Both of them laughed. For a while, it felt like the years had folded backward, like they had found each other again. Then Ethan's phone vibrated. He ignored it. A second vibration followed. Then a third. Maya looked toward the device. "You should answer it." "It can wait." "What if it's important?" He sighed and picked up the phone. The screen displayed Vanessa's name. He answered. "Everything okay?" Her voice sounded unusually serious. "I'm sorry to bother you." "What happened?" "The accounting team found another inconsistency." His expression changed immediately. "I'll be there. You don't have to come tonight. If there's a problem, I need to know." He ended the call. Maya quietly watched him. "You have to go." "I'm afraid so." She forced a small smile. "I understand." He leaned over and kissed her forehead. "I'll make it up to you." She nodded. "I know you'll try." The wording stayed with Ethan as he hurried toward the elevator. Not, "I know you will." "I know you'll try." Somewhere along the way, even Maya had stopped expecting certainty. When Ethan reached the office, only a handful of lights remained on. Vanessa waited beside a conference table covered with files. "Thanks for coming. What did you find?" She handed him a folder. "These authorization records." He examined the pages carefully. Several digital approvals had been issued using executive credentials. Some belonged to senior accountants. Others belonged to legal compliance officers. One name appeared repeatedly. Ethan frowned. "That's strange. I thought so too." "But these signatures could have been copied." "They could." Vanessa nodded. "That's why we shouldn't jump to conclusions." Again, she sounded reasonable, measured, objective. Exactly the voice Ethan wanted to hear during uncertainty. He closed the folder. "Let's keep this confidential until we know more." "I agree." As he turned to leave, Vanessa hesitated. "Ethan?" "Yes? I know how much pressure you're under." He smiled tiredly. "Some days, I feel like every decision carries $1 million consequence." She looked at him with quiet sympathy. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" Don't let your emotions make decisions your judgment should make. He nodded. I won't. Neither of them realized that those words would soon become painfully ironic. The next Saturday morning, Maya suggested they visit Ethan's younger sister, Claire. Claire had recently given birth to her first child. Watching Ethan hold his infant nephew transformed him. His shoulders relaxed. His laugh came more easily. Claire smiled from across the room. I haven't seen you this happy in months. I've just been busy. She raised an eyebrow. That's your favorite answer. It's usually true. Claire looked at Maya before returning her attention to her brother. Just don't get so busy building your company that you forget to build your family. The room grew quiet. Ethan smiled politely. I won't. Maya looked out the window. She wanted to believe him. So did Claire. Sometimes the people who love us recognize our blind spots long before we do. The problem is that love cannot force someone to see what they are not yet willing to notice. As they drove home that afternoon, neither Ethan nor Maya spoke much. Outside, the city moved as it always had. Inside the car, something invisible had shifted. Not because they loved each other less, but because life had begun asking questions neither of them yet knew how to answer. And somewhere inside Caldwell Capital, another carefully placed piece of deception was waiting for the perfect moment to be discovered. By the following Monday, the atmosphere inside Caldwell Capital had changed. Employees still greeted one another in the hallways. Meetings still filled the conference rooms. The stock price remained steady. From the outside, nothing seemed different. But beneath the polished surface, uncertainty had begun spreading through the company like a crack beneath a frozen lake, almost invisible, until someone stepped in the wrong place. Ethan walked into the executive meeting carrying a folder marked Confidential. Around the table sat the company's chief financial officer, the head of compliance, Vanessa, and 2 members of the internal audit team. The lead auditor connected his laptop to the projector. We've completed the preliminary review. Ethan leaned forward. What did you find? We've identified unauthorized access to several financial files. From inside the company. Yes. Any indication who? The auditor hesitated before changing slides. A list of employee credentials appeared on the screen. Most names belonged to finance executives Ethan knew well. Then another name appeared. Maya Caldwell. My wife? The room fell silent. The auditor nodded cautiously. Her legal credentials were used to access compliance files connected to the Horizon merger. Ethan looked up immediately. Used? Yes. You said used. We're not saying she personally accessed them. So someone could have used her credentials? It's possible. Vanessa spoke before anyone else could. Let's not rush to conclusions. The auditor agreed. There are several explanations. Could someone have stolen her login information? Absolutely. Could this be a technical error? It happens. Ethan slowly leaned back. Relief washed over him. For a moment. Then another slide appeared. Unfortunately, the auditor continued, there's more. The screen displayed several document approval records. Each one contained Maya's digital authorization, or what appeared to be her authorization. The room became painfully quiet. Ethan stared at the screen. His mind refused to connect what his eyes were seeing. Maya had no reason to involve herself in company finances. She worked for a non-profit. She barely discussed his business unless he brought it up first. None of this made sense. It has to be a mistake, he finally said. I hope you're right, the auditor replied. We're continuing the investigation. Vanessa quietly closed her notebook. I think that's exactly what we should do. Her voice remained calm, measured, reasonable. Everything about her sounded objective. It was impossible to question someone who appeared more interested in fairness than judgment. That evening, Maya arrived home carrying a grocery bag filled with ingredients for Ethan's favorite homemade lasagna. She smiled when she noticed his car already parked in the garage. You're home early. I am. He emerged from the study carrying a stack of papers. His smile appeared a second too late. She noticed. Everything okay? He nodded. Just work. She walked into the kitchen. You're saying those words more often lately. He followed her. It's been a difficult month. I know. She unpacked tomatoes, fresh basil, cheese, and ground beef onto the counter. I thought we deserved a real dinner. He watched her quietly. His mind kept returning to the meeting, to the screen, to her name. He hated himself for thinking about it. Even more, he hated that he couldn't stop. Maya, she looked up. Yes? Have you ever? He stopped. She waited patiently. Ever what? He forced a smile. Nothing. She tilted her head. That didn't sound like nothing. I just forgot what I was going to ask. She laughed softly. You've been doing that a lot. He laughed too. But inside, Guilt settled heavily across his chest. For the first time in 10 years, he had almost questioned her honesty, and he wasn't sure why the thought frightened him more. Because he considered asking, or because a small part of him had wanted an answer. The investigation continued for another 2 weeks. No public announcements were made. Only a handful of executives knew anything was wrong. Then another discovery changed everything. The audit team found encrypted emails discussing confidential merger information before it became public knowledge. Someone inside the company had leaked protected documents. The sender's identity remained hidden, but one recipient immediately caught everyone's attention. A non-profit legal organization, the same organization where Maya worked. The room grew silent once again. The compliance director spoke carefully. "This doesn't prove anyone here leaked information." "But it connects to Maya's office," another executive added. Vanessa immediately responded, "Or someone intentionally wants it to look that way." The room relaxed slightly. Ethan appreciated her fairness. She never accused. She never defended. She simply encouraged caution. Ironically, every calm observation she made caused the suspicion to feel even more believable. Because reasonable people rarely looked manipulative. Later that night, Ethan sat alone on the balcony, while the city lights shimmered below. His phone rang. It was Claire. "Hey, little brother." He smiled. "How's my favorite nephew? Keeping us awake." "I hear that's normal." Claire laughed. "Everything okay?" "Of course." "You hesitated." "I'm just tired." "Ethan, what? I've known you your whole life." He looked toward the skyline. "When you're stressed, you stop sleeping." "I'm fine." "And when you say you're fine." She sighed. "That's usually when you aren't." He rubbed his forehead. "Work has become complicated." "You've survived complicated before. This feels different." Claire remained quiet for a moment. Then she said something their father often used to tell them. "When you can't see clearly, don't make permanent decisions." He smiled faintly. "Dad used to say that." "He was usually right." "I know." After hanging up, Ethan remained outside for nearly an hour. The cold wind drifted across the balcony. Inside the apartment, Maya had already fallen asleep on the living room couch with a book resting on her lap. He quietly covered her with a blanket. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Looking at her peaceful face, he asked himself a question he never imagined needing to ask. Could someone you love completely still keep something from you? He immediately hated himself for even thinking it. Trust wasn't supposed to work that way. Either you believed someone, or you didn't. Yet doubt rarely arrives like a crashing wave. It slips quietly into ordinary thoughts, asking questions that seem reasonable enough to entertain. And once those questions are welcomed, they begin looking for answers, even where none exist. Outside, another cold wind swept across Chicago. Far away, hidden behind layers of carefully planted deception, someone smiled. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. The investigation entered its 6th week. What had begun as a few accounting discrepancies had grown into one of the most sensitive internal inquiries in Caldwell Capital's history. No one outside the executive team knew the details. Rumors, however, had begun circulating. Employees whispered during lunch breaks. Department managers exchanged cautious glances whenever auditors walked past. The uncertainty was becoming impossible to ignore. Ethan hated every minute of it. He had built Caldwell Capital on one principle: trust. Now, trust was the one thing disappearing faster than anything else. One Tuesday morning, Ethan was reviewing quarterly reports when there was a knock at his office door. "Come in." Vanessa entered carrying a thin manila envelope. "I think you should see this." He accepted it. "What is it?" It came from the forensic audit team. He opened the envelope slowly. Inside were copies of bank transfers. Several unusually large payments had been routed through shell companies before disappearing into offshore accounts. The amounts totaled millions of dollars. Ethan's expression hardened. "Have they identified who approved these?" Vanessa hesitated. "They're still investigating." He flipped to the final page. His eyes stopped moving. The authorization signature looked painfully familiar. Maya. His voice barely escaped above a whisper. Vanessa immediately spoke. "Ethan." "Oh, no." He shook his head. "This can't be right." "I know. Someone forged it." "They may have." He looked at her. "You believe that?" She held his gaze. "I believe evidence deserves to be examined." Her answer sounded careful, objective, exactly what Ethan needed to hear. And yet, something had begun changing inside him. Weeks earlier, he dismissed every suspicious document as coincidence. Now, after seeing one strange report after another, certainty no longer came as easily. His confidence in Maya remained, but, for the first time, it no longer stood untouched. That evening, Maya noticed Ethan barely touched his dinner. You don't like it? He looked up. What? The chicken? Oh. He forced a smile. It's great. She reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. You're somewhere else. He looked into her eyes. For several seconds, he considered telling her everything. The investigation, the signatures, the growing suspicion. Instead, he said the safest thing he could think of. Work has been difficult. She nodded. I figured. How? You've stopped telling me about your day. He looked down at his plate. I didn't want to bring stress home. She smiled sadly. Sometimes, not sharing your stress creates even more of it. Those words stayed with him. He wanted to tell her. He truly did. But another voice inside him whispered something dangerous. What if she's involved? He hated the thought. It felt disloyal, cruel, almost impossible. Yet, once fear plants a question in the mind, silence often becomes the place where it grows. The next afternoon, Ethan met privately with the lead forensic investigator. I need complete honesty, Ethan said. That's what we're here for. How strong is the evidence? The investigator opened several files. We've traced multiple unauthorized approvals. To Maya? To her credentials. That's not the same thing. No. What else? The transactions correspond with legal reviews conducted by her nonprofit. Ethan frowned. My wife doesn't even handle corporate mergers. We know. Then none of this makes sense. We agree. The investigator folded his hands. Mr. Caldwell, sometimes innocent people appear guilty. Ethan immediately nodded. Exactly. But... The investigator paused. Sometimes guilty people work very hard to appear innocent. The sentence echoed inside Ethan's mind long after the meeting ended. That evening, Vanessa found Ethan standing alone beside the office windows overlooking the city. You've been staring outside for 20 minutes. I didn't realize. She walked beside him. Can I ask you something? He nodded. If this investigation involved anyone else, he remained silent. Would you already have suspended them? Ethan answered honestly. Probably. So why is this different? He looked at her. Because she's my wife. Vanessa nodded. I understand. She let several seconds pass before speaking again. I admire your loyalty. He looked away. But loyalty shouldn't stop the truth. He sighed deeply. No, it shouldn't. Vanessa placed a file on the table beside him. I don't want to believe Maya has done anything wrong. Neither do I. But if she's innocent... She looked directly into his eyes. Then, a proper investigation will prove it. The words sounded perfectly reasonable. That was what made them so powerful. She never demanded action. She merely suggested fairness. And sometimes the most dangerous manipulation hides behind the appearance of logic. Meanwhile, Maya spent the afternoon helping a teenage client whose father had been wrongfully arrested years earlier. The young man sat quietly across from her. My dad always says people decided he was guilty before anyone listened. Maya smiled gently. What do you think? I think people believe what they're afraid might be true. She wrote something in her notebook. What did you write? A reminder. He leaned forward. What does it say? She turned the notebook toward him. Justice begins by listening before judging. The teenager smiled. I like that. So do I. Neither of them knew that only a few miles away, Maya herself was slowly becoming the subject of a judgment no one had yet been brave enough to question. Late that night, Ethan entered the bedroom to find Maya already asleep. A legal file rested beside her pillow. Reading glasses had slipped halfway down her face. She looked peaceful, ordinary, exactly like the woman he had shared 10 years of life with. He sat quietly on the edge of the bed, his eyes filled with tears. I trust you. He whispered so softly that even he barely heard the words. Then another thought interrupted. Do you? He closed his eyes. For the first time since their wedding day, he didn't know how to answer. Outside, another storm gathered over Chicago. Inside Caldwell Capital, the final pieces of the trap were almost in place. And before another week had passed, Ethan Caldwell would make the single worst decision of his life. The storm arrived just after sunrise. Heavy rain streaked across the glass walls of Caldwell Capital, turning the Chicago skyline into a blur of grey shadows. Employees hurried through the lobby with umbrellas dripping onto polished marble floors, unaware that before the day ended, the company would become the center of a story every news station in the city would cover. Ethan had barely taken off his coat when his assistant appeared outside his office. The forensic team is here. He nodded. Send them in. 3 investigators entered, followed by the company's outside legal counsel. No one smiled. The lead investigator placed another file on Ethan's desk. "We've completed our report." Ethan looked at the thick binder, but didn't open it. "What did you find?" "We uncovered additional transfers." "And?" "The funds were moved through 3 shell companies before reaching an offshore account." Ethan folded his arms. "Have you identified the account holder?" The investigator exchanged a glance with the attorney. "The account was opened using stolen identification. So you still don't know who owns it?" "No." Relief flickered across Ethan's face. Then the investigator continued. "But we do have enough evidence to recommend criminal charges against the individual whose credentials authorized the transfers." The room fell silent. Ethan didn't have to ask the name. He already knew. "Maya Caldwell." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. "No," Ethan said immediately. "There has to be another explanation." "We considered several." "And?" "The evidence consistently points back to her digital credentials, her legal reviews, and the timing of the transfers." The attorney spoke carefully. "The decision now belongs to law enforcement." Ethan stared at the city outside his office. He wanted someone, anyone, to tell him the report was wrong. Instead, the room remained painfully quiet. Across town, Maya stood outside the Cook County Courthouse after helping prepare a housing discrimination case. The hearing had gone well. A young family facing eviction had finally been given another chance. As they thanked her, Maya smiled. "You don't owe me anything." "We owe you everything," the husband replied. She shook her head. "No, just promise me something." "What?" "When life gets better, help someone else." The couple nodded through grateful tears. Maya watched them walk away, holding their little daughter's hands. Moments like these reminded her why she had chosen public service over corporate law. Success wasn't always measured in money. Sometimes it was measured by the number of people who walked away believing tomorrow might be kinder than today. Her phone vibrated. Ethan calling. She answered immediately. "Hey." His voice sounded strained. "Where are you?" "Outside the courthouse." "What time will you be back at the office?" She checked her watch. "Probably another 20 minutes. Silence. "Ethan? I'll meet you there. Is everything okay?" Another pause. "We need to talk." His tone unsettled her. It wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It sounded defeated. "I'll see you soon," she said. Ethan reached the courthouse parking lot several minutes before Maya. He remained inside his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His phone buzzed. "Vanessa." He answered. "Have you spoken to her?" "Not yet." "I know this isn't easy." "No. If she's innocent, the investigation will show it." He closed his eyes. "I keep telling myself that. And if she isn't?" He didn't answer. Vanessa's voice softened. "Sometimes the hardest thing love asks us to do is accept the truth." The call ended. Ethan looked through the windshield just as Maya appeared at the courthouse entrance. She smiled when she saw him. That smile nearly broke him. She walked toward the car, opened the passenger door and sat down. "You drove all the way here?" He nodded. "I wanted to talk in person." She immediately sensed something was wrong. "What happened?" He couldn't look at her. "The investigation is over." "What investigation?" His silence answered before his words did. "Ethan." "The company believes someone stole millions." She frowned. "I'm sorry. That's terrible. They think it was you." The smile disappeared from her face. For several seconds, she simply stared at him, convinced she had misunderstood. "What?" "They found documents." "What documents?" "Financial approvals." "I've never approved anything for your company." "I know. Then why would they think I did?" "They say your credentials were used." "My credentials?" She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "That's impossible." "I want to believe that." The sentence hung between them. Maya slowly turned toward him. "You want to believe that?" "I do. You don't know?" "Maya." "No." Her voice trembled. "Answer me." He finally looked into her eyes. "I don't know what to think." The words struck harder than any accusation. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of trust. Reduced to 4 devastating words. "I don't know." Tears filled Maya's eyes. "You could have asked me. I was trying to protect the investigation. You were supposed to protect your wife." Before Ethan could respond, several unmarked police vehicles entered the parking lot. Maya watched them stop. 3 detectives stepped out. One approached Ethan's side of the vehicle. Another walked toward Maya. Her heartbeat quickened. "Ethan." He looked just as confused. The detective knocked gently on the window. Maya lowered it. Mrs. Maya Caldwell? Yes. I'm Detective Laura Bennett, with the Financial Crimes Unit. She displayed her badge. We have a warrant for your arrest. The world seemed to stop. There has to be a mistake, Maya whispered. We can discuss everything downtown. Another officer opened the passenger door. Please step out of the vehicle. Maya didn't move. She looked at Ethan. He sat frozen behind the steering wheel. Ethan. Oh, she wasn't asking him to stop the police. She was asking him one simple question without saying the words. Do you believe me? His mouth opened. Nothing came out. The silence gave her the answer she never imagined hearing. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she slowly stepped from the car. People outside the courthouse began pulling out their phones. Someone started recording. Reporters who had been covering another trial noticed the activity and rushed toward the parking lot. Camera flashes erupted. Mrs. Caldwell, did you steal company funds? Did your husband know? Are more arrests coming? The questions came from every direction. Maya heard none of them. She kept looking at Ethan, even as the detective gently turned her around, even as cold steel closed around her wrists, even as the handcuffs clicked into place. She wasn't crying because she had been arrested. She was crying because the man who had once promised to stand beside her in every storm had stood perfectly still while she faced it alone. As the police vehicle pulled away, Ethan remained motionless in the parking lot. He watched until the flashing lights disappeared into traffic. For the first time in his life, the billionaire who believed he could solve any problem with enough intelligence, enough influence, or enough money, realized there were moments that could never be taken back. And this was one of them. The ride to the Cook County Detention Center lasted less than 30 minutes. To Maya, it felt like an entire lifetime. She sat silently in the back of the police vehicle, her wrists aching from the handcuffs. Rain rolled down the windows, blurring the city she had called home for more than a decade. The same streets she had walked to help struggling families. The same courthouse where she had defended people who couldn't afford attorneys. Now she was traveling those streets as a criminal. She closed her eyes, not because she was ashamed, because she couldn't stop replaying the look on Ethan's face. He hadn't accused her. He hadn't defended her either. He had simply frozen. Sometimes betrayal wasn't what someone did. It was what they failed to do when you needed them most. Inside the detention center, the booking process began immediately. A correctional officer guided Maya toward a long counter. Empty your pockets. She quietly removed her phone, her wedding ring, a small silver necklace her grandmother had given her before law school, her wallet, her watch. Each item disappeared into a clear plastic evidence bag. The officer attached a barcode to it. Sign here. Maya stared at the bag. Everything that identified her life had been reduced to inventory. She signed without speaking. Another officer stepped forward. Stand against the wall. The camera flashed. Her booking photograph appeared on a computer screen. The woman looking back barely resembled the confident attorney who had left for work that morning. A fingerprint scanner illuminated one finger after another. The officer typed steadily. Occupation? Attorney. The officer looked up. Really? Maya nodded. He sighed. That's becoming more common than you'd think. She wanted to explain, to tell him there had been a mistake. Instead, she remained silent. She had spent years encouraging clients to trust the justice system. Now she wondered whether the system recognized the difference between accusation and guilt. Meanwhile, news spread through Chicago with astonishing speed. Television stations interrupted afternoon programming. Financial news websites published breaking headlines. Billionaire CEO's wife arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud investigation. Outside Caldwell Capital, reporters gathered beneath umbrellas despite the steady rain. Employees watched from office windows. Some looked shocked. Others simply looked confused. Inside the executive boardroom, no one spoke. The television mounted on the wall replayed Maya being escorted into the police vehicle. The room remained painfully quiet. Finally, one board member turned toward Ethan. You did the right thing. Ethan didn't answer. Another executive nodded. No one is above the law. Still no response. Only Vanessa spoke carefully. I don't think today feels like a victory for anyone. The room fell silent again. Ethan appreciated her compassion. He didn't notice the almost invisible smile that crossed her face after everyone looked away. It lasted less than a second, long enough for satisfaction, short enough for no one to see. Claire arrived at Ethan's penthouse just after 7 that evening. He opened the door looking as though he hadn't moved since returning home. You look terrible, she said softly. I feel worse. She walked inside. The apartment was unusually quiet. Maya's purse still rested beside the front door. Her reading glasses remained on the coffee table. A half-finished crossword puzzle lay open exactly where she had left it that morning. Claire picked up the glasses. Have you talked to her? They aren't allowing visitors. What about an attorney? I hired the best criminal defense team in Chicago. She looked at him. Why? He frowned. What do you mean, why? If you believe she's innocent. He interrupted. I do. Then why does she need a criminal defense attorney? He didn't answer. Claire slowly sat down. Ethan. I don't know what's happening. She nodded gently. I believe you. They found evidence. I know. It all points to Maya. Claire leaned forward. And after 10 years of marriage. Her voice remained calm. What does your heart point to? The question struck him harder than any accusation. He remembered every ordinary act of kindness Maya had shown over the years. The nights she stayed awake beside his hospital bed after his appendectomy. The weekends she spent helping his mother after knee surgery. The anonymous donations she quietly made to families facing eviction. The way she always returned extra change whenever a cashier accidentally gave her too much. Could someone like that secretly steal millions of dollars? His heart screamed, no. His mind whispered, maybe. And that quiet whisper frightened him more than anything else. Late that night, Maya was escorted into a small holding cell. The room contained 2 narrow bunks, a stainless steel sink, a metal toilet tucked into the corner, nothing else. Her cellmate, an older woman with grey hair and tired eyes, looked up from a paperback novel. You knew? Maya nodded. The woman closed her book. I'm Evelyn. Maya, you look scared. I think I'm still trying to understand what's happening. Evelyn smiled kindly. That's how most people look their first night. Maya sat on the lower bunk. I didn't do what they said. Evelyn studied her for several seconds. You know what I learned after 8 years in places like this? What? The truth matters. Maya looked hopeful. But... Evelyn continued. The truth and proving the truth aren't always the same thing. The words settled heavily inside the room. Maya lowered her head. For the first time since the arrest, tears finally came. Not loud sobs. Just quiet tears falling into trembling hands. Evelyn didn't offer advice. She didn't tell Maya everything would be okay. Instead, she moved to the lower bunk and sat beside her in silence. Sometimes compassion isn't found in having the right words. Sometimes it's found in refusing to let someone cry alone. Outside the narrow cell window, the lights of Chicago continued shining against the night sky. The city kept moving. Businesses remained open. Traffic flowed through busy streets. People laughed over dinner. Children finished homework. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet for Ethan and Maya, the world they had spent 10 years building had ended in a single afternoon. Neither of them realized that somewhere beyond those prison walls, the person responsible for their suffering was already preparing the next move. Because destroying a marriage had never been the final goal. Destroying Ethan Caldwell's empire was. The first morning inside the detention center began long before sunrise. At 5 o'clock, fluorescent lights flooded the cell without warning. A correctional officer walked down the hallway, tapping each steel door with a baton. Count time. Maya opened her eyes slowly. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. Then the cold concrete walls reminded her. She sat upright on the narrow bunk, folded the thin blanket, and waited quietly while officers completed their morning count. Across the cell, Evelyn stretched her shoulders. You slept. Maya gave a faint smile. I closed my eyes. That's different. It is. Evelyn stood and straightened her uniform. The first week is always the hardest. Does it ever become easy? No. She shook her head, gently. It just becomes familiar. Those words lingered in Maya's mind. Human beings could become accustomed to almost anything. That realization was both comforting and heartbreaking. Breakfast was served in a crowded cafeteria where hundreds of conversations blended into one constant hum. Some women laughed. Others argued. Many simply stared into space. Maya carried her tray to an empty table. Before she could sit, another inmate approached. Mind if we join you? Maya looked up. 3 women stood there, each carrying the same grey tray. Of course. The oldest introduced herself first. I'm Denise. The others smiled. Tasha, Linda. None of them asked why Maya had been arrested. None of them demanded her story. They simply shared breakfast. After several minutes, Denise finally spoke. You were the lawyer, right? Maya looked surprised. How did you know? You carry yourself like someone who spent years solving other people's problems. The table laughed softly. I was an attorney. Denise smiled. You still are. Those 4 simple words caught Maya off guard. For the first time since entering prison, someone had reminded her that one accusation didn't erase an entire life. Across the city, Ethan stood in the lobby of Caldwell Capital as reporters shouted questions from behind security barriers. Mr. Caldwell, do you believe your wife is guilty? Did you help investigators build the case? Is the company facing additional criminal charges? He ignored every question. Inside the elevator, he loosened his tie and leaned against the wall. The silence felt heavier each day. When the elevator doors opened, Vanessa was already waiting outside the executive floor. You made it through, the reporters. Barely. She handed him a cup of coffee. You forgot breakfast again. He accepted it absent-mindedly. Thank you. You should take care of yourself. He looked toward the conference room. I don't feel like I deserve to. Vanessa lowered her voice. Ethan. You've barely slept. I keep seeing her face. You couldn't stop the investigation. I could have asked more questions. You trusted the process. I trusted evidence. Vanessa remained quiet for a moment. Then she said, sometimes that's all anyone can do. Her words offered comfort, but they also gave Ethan permission to stop questioning the investigation, exactly as she intended. That afternoon, Maya was escorted to a small legal conference room. Waiting on the other side of the glass partition was her defense attorney, Rebecca Lawson. Rebecca extended her hand. I'm representing you. Maya shook it. Thank you for coming. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence. And? Rebecca opened a thick file. It's serious. I didn't do any of it. Rebecca nodded. I believe you. Maya looked at her carefully. You don't even know me. I don't have to. Rebecca smiled gently. My job isn't to decide whether I like you. My job is to find the truth. For the first time in days, Maya felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Hope, Rebecca continued. The prosecution's case relies heavily on digital records. They're fake. I think so too. But proving that will take time. How much time? Rebecca hesitated. I honestly don't know. Maya lowered her eyes. Time. It suddenly felt like the most expensive thing in the world. That evening, Claire arrived at the detention center for visiting hours. The sisters-in-law looked at one another through a thick glass partition. Claire picked up the telephone first. I'm so sorry. Maya smiled weakly. This isn't your fault. I should have done something. You've done more than enough by coming. Claire struggled to hold back tears. Ethan isn't sleeping. Maya remained silent. He hired the best attorneys. I know. He still believes in you. Maya looked down at her hands. Does he? Claire hesitated. He wants to. The answer hurt more than either woman expected. Wanting to believe someone wasn't the same as believing them. Maya understood the difference now, more clearly than ever before. Before leaving, Claire placed her hand against the glass. So did Ethan once. Maya slowly lifted her own hand until it rested opposite Claire's. Separated by only a sheet of glass. United by the same quiet sadness. Later that night, Ethan wandered through the empty penthouse. Every room reminded him of Maya. Her favorite mug still sat beside the coffee machine. A sweater hung neatly over the back of the living room chair. A bookmark rested halfway through the novel she had been reading. The apartment hadn't changed. Only the person missing from it had. He opened the bedroom closet. Her side remained exactly as she had left it. He reached toward one of her jackets, then stopped. For the first time in years, the silence inside the apartment frightened him. Not because it was loud, because it forced him to hear his own thoughts. He remembered something Maya had once said during an interview for a local non-profit newsletter. The easiest thing in the world is to judge someone you've never truly listened to. At the time, he thought it was simply a thoughtful quote. Now it echoed through the empty apartment like a question directed at him alone. Had he truly listened? Or had he listened only until the evidence became louder than the woman he loved? Outside, snowflakes began drifting gently across the Chicago skyline. Inside the detention center, Maya knelt beside her bunk before going to sleep. She didn't pray for revenge. She didn't pray for punishment. She prayed for courage. The courage to remain truthful when lies seemed stronger. The courage to remain kind when bitterness felt easier. And the courage not to let injustice turn her into someone she would no longer recognize. She climbed back onto the narrow bunk and closed her eyes. For the first time since her arrest, she understood something prison could never take away. They could confine her body. They could damage her reputation. They could steal her freedom. But only she could decide whether they would steal her character. That decision, she realized, would shape the rest of her life far more than any courtroom ever could. Before we continue, take a moment to think about this. If you were in Ethan's position, would you have trusted the evidence, or the person who had stood beside you for 10 years? And if you were Maya, could you ever forgive someone who didn't stand up for you when you needed them the most? There's no right or wrong answer, And that's what makes this story so powerful. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read them all, and I'd love to know what you would have done. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell. It helps this channel reach more people who enjoy meaningful stories with real-life lessons about love, trust, forgiveness, and personal growth. Don't go anywhere, because in the next chapter, the truth begins to crack beneath the surface. Ethan's billion-dollar empire will start falling apart. Maya will discover unexpected strength behind prison walls, and someone close to Ethan will make a mistake that changes everything. 3 months passed. Winter settled over Chicago, covering rooftops with snow and turning the city into a landscape of steel, glass, and silence. Inside the state correctional facility where Maya had been transferred to await trial, life followed a rhythm that no longer surprised her. Morning count, breakfast, work assignment, library, dinner, lights out. The routine hadn't become easier. It had simply become familiar. Maya had stopped measuring time by calendars. Instead, she measured it by letters from Claire, weekly meetings with Rebecca Lawson, and the women whose lives slowly became intertwined with hers. Every Wednesday afternoon, she volunteered in the prison library, helping inmates prepare legal paperwork and study for their GED exams. One afternoon, a young inmate named Jasmine approached her carrying a stack of papers. "I don't understand any of this." Maya smiled warmly. "Let's look at it together." Jasmine sat across from her. They denied my appeal. "We'll go through the decision 1 page at a time." "You really think there's still hope?" Maya nodded. "As long as there's truth, there's hope." Jasmine laughed quietly. "You always say things like that." "My grandmother used to." "Were they always true?" Maya paused before answering. "They're easier to believe when life is going well." "And now?" She looked around the small library. "Now they're a choice." Jasmine studied her for a moment. "How do you stay so calm after everything that's happened to you?" Maya looked toward the frosted window. "I remind myself every morning that what happened to me is part of my story." She smiled gently. "It doesn't get to become my identity." Nearby, another inmate quietly listened to the conversation. Prison had introduced Maya to women who had made terrible decisions. Women who had been wrongly accused. Women who had simply run out of chances. She treated each of them the same way she had treated clients before her arrest. By listening first, judging later, sometimes not at all. Without realizing it, Maya was becoming someone many of the women depended on. Not because she had all the answers, because she never made anyone feel invisible. Across the city, Caldwell Capital was beginning to unravel. The Horizon International merger had stalled. 2 major investors withdrew their funding. Financial journalists questioned the company's leadership. Inside the executive boardroom, tension had replaced confidence. "We've lost another institutional investor," the chief financial officer announced. "That's the 3rd this month." A board member looked directly at Ethan. "What are we doing to restore confidence?" "We're cooperating fully with investigators." Another executive shook his head. "That's not enough anymore. The market wants certainty." Ethan rubbed his temples. "We'll get through this." No one responded. Confidence had become difficult to manufacture, especially when the company's reputation seemed to worsen every week. As the meeting ended, one board member quietly pulled Ethan aside. "You need to think about succession." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "If this continues." The older man sighed. "The board may decide new leadership is necessary." For several seconds, Ethan simply stared at him. He had spent 15 years building Caldwell Capital from a rented office into one of the nation's fastest-growing investment firms. The idea that he could lose it had once seemed impossible. Now, it felt frighteningly real. Later that afternoon, Vanessa entered Ethan's office carrying fresh market reports. "You've skipped lunch again." He barely looked up from his computer. "I'm not hungry." "You've said that every day this week." "I have bigger problems than food." She placed the reports on his desk. "I know." He leaned back in his chair. "Do you ever feel like you're trying to stop a building from collapsing with your bare hands?" Vanessa gave a sympathetic smile. "Every major crisis feels that way. I keep fixing one problem, and another appears." She nodded. "That's because someone is attacking more than your finances." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "They're attacking confidence." She pointed toward the window overlooking downtown Chicago. "Money follows confidence. When people stop believing in a company, they stop investing in it," Ethan finished. "Exactly." He sighed. "I don't even know who I'm fighting anymore." Vanessa lowered her voice. "Then maybe it's time to stop reacting." She paused. "And start asking who benefits from all this." The question stayed with Ethan long after she left. For the first time, He wondered whether someone had orchestrated everything from the beginning. But every trail investigators followed still circled back to the same place. Maya. The thought exhausted him. Not because he believed it, because he desperately wanted to stop wondering. That evening, Claire invited Ethan to dinner. Her husband grilled steaks while their toddler played on the living room floor. The ordinary warmth of family life felt almost foreign. Claire noticed Ethan watching her son stack wooden blocks. He's getting better. He is. He still knocks them over every time. Claire smiled. That's how children learn. Ethan watched the little boy laugh as the tower collapsed. I wish rebuilding a company were that simple. Claire handed him a glass of iced tea. I wasn't talking about your company. He looked at her. I was talking about you. Silence settled between them. You've changed. I've had to. No. She shook her head gently. You've become someone who carries guilt instead of hope. He stared into his glass. I don't know how to fix this. Claire reached across the table. Maybe stop trying to fix everything. He frowned. What else am I supposed to do? Start looking for the truth instead of looking for control. Those words followed him all the way home. Control had always been his answer. Control built his fortune. Control protected his company. Control made him believe every problem had a strategy. But this wasn't a business problem. It was a human one. And human hearts rarely followed spreadsheets. Late that night, Ethan opened the old wooden box where he kept photographs from before Caldwell Capital existed. Near the bottom was a faded picture of him and Maya standing outside their first apartment. Neither of them wore expensive clothes. Neither of them owned much. But they were laughing, really laughing. He traced the edge of the photograph with his thumb. For the first time in months, a painful realization settled over him. He had spent weeks asking whether Maya had betrayed him. He had never once asked whether he had betrayed her first by allowing suspicion to speak louder than 10 years of shared life. Outside, snow continued falling over Chicago. Inside the quiet apartment, the empire Ethan had worked so hard to build no longer felt like his greatest achievement, nor his greatest loss. The first signs that something was deeply wrong did not come from investigators. They came from numbers. Every Monday morning, Caldwell Capital's executive team gathered to review the company's financial position. For years, those meetings had been almost routine. Now they felt like emergency briefings. The chief financial officer stood before the large presentation screen, his usual confidence replaced by visible concern. Our liquidity has dropped another 12%. A murmur spread around the room. We've also received notice that 2 international partners are delaying the Horizon expansion. One board member frowned. They're delaying it because of Maya Caldwell? The CFO shook his head. No. Then why? They've raised concerns about inconsistencies inside our internal financial reporting. The room became silent. Ethan looked up immediately. Inconsistencies? The CFO changed slides. These transactions. Rows of numbers appeared on the screen. Millions of dollars had been transferred between subsidiary accounts over the previous 8 months. None of the transfers were illegal by themselves. But together, they formed a pattern no one could explain. When did this start? Ethan asked. About 8 months ago. Who approved them? That's the problem. The CFO enlarged several authorization records. Every approval belonged to different executives, different departments, different dates, too different. Someone had intentionally scattered the transactions to avoid attracting attention. Ethan slowly stood. Freeze every account connected to these transfers. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances. Every account? One asked. Immediately. What if that disrupts operations? It already has. His voice remained calm. But if someone is stealing from this company, they're not stopping because we're being polite. For the first time in weeks, Ethan wasn't reacting. He was thinking. And somewhere inside him, the first genuine crack appeared in the story he had been accepting. That afternoon, Rebecca Lawson arrived at the correctional facility carrying a thick cardboard box. Maya looked at the overflowing files. Please tell me that's good news. Rebecca smiled. It might be. She opened the box. These are the prosecution's discovery documents. So? They finally gave us complete access. Maya leaned forward. What did you find? Rebecca pulled out several folders. I noticed something unusual. She spread dozens of financial records across the table. Look at these timestamps. Maya adjusted her reading glasses. They're all within minutes of each other. Exactly. But they were supposedly approved from different locations. Rebecca nodded. Chicago. New York. Boston. 3 different cities. Maya frowned. No one can physically log into 3 systems from 3 states within 7 minutes. Rebecca smiled. Now you're thinking like the attorney I read about. Maya looked at the documents again. So the records were manipulated. That's what I believe. But can we prove it? Rebecca carefully closed the folder. Not yet. The words were disappointing. But for the first time since her arrest, there was evidence that pointed somewhere other than her. Hope no longer rested on faith alone. It finally had facts. Back at Caldwell Capital, Ethan requested a private meeting with the company's cybersecurity director. I want everything. The director looked confused. Everything? Every login. Every deleted file. Every remote access record. The director hesitated. Those reports are enormous. I don't care. I want to know who entered this system and when. The director nodded. It may take several days. Take them. As the man stood to leave, Ethan asked one final question. Has anyone besides investigators requested access to those records? The director thought for a moment. Yes. Ethan looked up. Who? The Horizon Consulting Team. Specifically? The director checked his tablet. There was one request about 6 weeks ago. He turned the screen toward Ethan. Requested by Vanessa Hart. Ethan stared at the name. Why? The request said she needed to verify compliance records. Did she? It appeared routine. Routine. The word echoed inside Ethan's mind. Almost everything Vanessa had done appeared routine. Every suggestion, every recommendation, every conversation. Nothing had ever seemed unusual. Until now. Meanwhile, prison life continued changing Maya in ways she never expected. One evening, Jasmine approached her carrying a folded letter. My daughter wrote to me. That's wonderful. I can't answer it. Why not? I dropped out of school when I was 14. Maya looked at the unopened envelope. You want help reading it? Jasmine nodded quietly. Maya unfolded the letter and began reading aloud. The little girl wrote about school, about losing her first tooth, about missing her mother every day. Halfway through, Jasmine covered her face and cried, I'm missing everything. Maya gently folded the letter. No? Jasmine looked up. I've missed birthdays. Christmas. My daughter's first dance recital. I've missed everything. Maya reached across the table. You've missed moments. They're not the same as love. Jasmine wiped away her tears. You really believe that? I do, because children remember who kept loving them. Even from far away. Several women sitting nearby listened quietly. That evening, Maya organized a literacy group inside the prison library. Women who had once believed education was behind them began learning to read. Others started studying for their GED. Correctional officers noticed the difference. Arguments became less frequent. The library became fuller. Hope, Maya realized, was contagious. So was hopelessness. Every person had to decide which one they would spread. Late that night, Ethan sat alone in his office reviewing security logs. Thousands of entries filled the screen. Most meant nothing. Then one detail caught his attention. A secure financial server had been accessed at 2:17 a.m. The building had been empty. Only one executive keycard had entered the floor that night. He enlarged the report. His heartbeat slowed. The name staring back at him wasn't Maya. It wasn't anyone from the finance department. It wasn't an auditor. It was someone he had trusted without question. Someone who had quietly stood beside him through every meeting. Someone who had repeatedly encouraged him to follow the evidence. The screen displayed one name, Vanessa Hart. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He immediately searched for another explanation. Maybe she had permission. Maybe it was part of the merger. Maybe. Then he remembered something. 6 weeks earlier, Vanessa had told him she was attending a charity dinner that same evening. She had even shown him photographs from the event. If she was inside Caldwell Capital after 2 in the morning, where had those photographs really come from? For the first time since Maya's arrest, Ethan felt something stronger than guilt. He felt fear. Not fear of losing his company. Fear that he had trusted the wrong person. And condemned the right one. As snow drifted quietly outside his office window, Ethan realized the foundation beneath every assumption he had made was beginning to crumble. And if Vanessa Hart had lied about one thing, how many other lies had he mistaken for the truth? Ethan didn't sleep that night. The security log remained open on his computer long after midnight. He read the same entry over and over, hoping his eyes had misunderstood what his mind refused to accept. Access granted. User, Vanessa Hart time, 2:17 a.m. He compared it with her calendar. The charity gala had begun at 7 that evening. According to the photos she had shown him, she had stayed until almost midnight. The timestamps on the pictures matched, or so he had believed. He enlarged one of the images stored in the company's event archive. Then, he noticed something he had overlooked before. The metadata had been removed. Someone had deliberately stripped away the original time information. His pulse quickened. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to make him ask the question he should have asked months ago. Why would someone erase something unless they were hiding when it was taken? For the first time since Maya's arrest, Ethan wasn't looking for evidence against her. He was looking for the truth, no matter where it led. The following morning, Ethan drove to Rebecca Lawson's office without informing anyone at Caldwell Capital. Rebecca looked surprised when her assistant announced his arrival. She entered the conference room carrying a legal pad. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know." She sat across from him. "What can I do for you?" Ethan took a slow breath. "I think I made the biggest mistake of my life." Rebecca didn't respond immediately. She had represented enough clients to know that guilt often spoke before facts. "What happened?" He slid a folder across the table. "I found something." Rebecca carefully reviewed the security logs. She looked up. "Where did these come from?" "Our internal cybersecurity department." "You gave these to the prosecution?" "No. They never asked." Rebecca frowned. "They never requested server access logs?" "They focused on financial records." She closed the folder. "That's unusual." "Very." Ethan leaned forward. "I want you to investigate Vanessa Hart." Rebecca studied him carefully. "Why?" "I don't have enough to accuse her. But I have enough to stop ignoring questions." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Questions are often where the truth begins." She picked up the folder again. "I'll have my investigators start today." As Ethan stood to leave, Rebecca spoke once more. "Mr. Caldwell?" He turned. "If Maya is innocent..." His shoulders stiffened. "Finding the truth won't erase what she's been through." He lowered his eyes. "I know." "No." Rebecca's voice remained gentle. "I don't think you do." Those words followed him all the way back to his car. Inside the correctional facility, Maya stood before a classroom of 15 inmates. The prison education coordinator had asked whether she would teach a weekly legal literacy class. At first, she refused. She wasn't sure she had anything left to give. Then Evelyn reminded her of something she once told another inmate. "They can lock the gate. They can't lock your purpose." Now, every Tuesday afternoon, women gathered inside the library carrying notebooks and borrowed pencils. Maya wrote 4 words across the whiteboard. "Know your rights first." The women copied them carefully. One inmate raised her hand. "I never finished high school. Can I still learn this?" Maya smiled. "Education doesn't care how old you are." Another woman spoke. "My public defender never explained anything." "That happens more often than it should." "So, what do? We ask questions. And if nobody answers, we keep asking." The room grew quiet. Maya looked at each woman individually. "The law belongs to every citizen. It doesn't belong only to lawyers. You deserve to understand the decisions affecting your life." By the end of the class, several women remained behind, not because they had more legal questions, because for 1 hour each week, someone spoke to them with respect instead of judgment. Weeks passed. Rebecca's investigation uncovered one disturbing detail after another. Vanessa had quietly approved several technology contracts without board authorization. She had recommended replacing portions of the company's cybersecurity software, only months before the fraudulent transfers began. Most alarming of all, one of the contractors responsible for installing the new system had previously worked for a consulting firm where Vanessa served as vice president. Rebecca called Ethan immediately. "We need to meet." An hour later, they sat inside her office. She spread photographs, contracts, and financial records across the conference table. "I still don't have enough to prove criminal intent." Ethan nodded. "But I have enough to establish opportunity." She pointed toward a timeline. Every major security change happened after Vanessa joined the merger. Another document followed. Every unusual transfer occurred after those changes. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "And Maya?" Rebecca slid another folder toward him. "We've confirmed several of the digital signatures were created from cloned authentication keys." He stared at her. "In plain English, they weren't signed by Maya. They were designed to look like she signed them." The room fell silent. Ethan closed his eyes. Months. She had spent months behind bars. Because he had trusted evidence someone else manufactured. His voice broke. "What have I done?" Rebecca answered honestly. "You believed what seemed impossible to question." He looked toward the window. "I should have questioned everything." Later that evening, Ethan parked outside the correctional facility. He wasn't there for a meeting. He knew Maya wouldn't agree to see him. Instead, he sat quietly across the street, watching visitors enter through the front gate. Mothers carrying drawings from their children, grandparents walking slowly with canes, young couples holding hands despite the security checkpoints waiting ahead. Everyone arrived, carrying hope. Everyone left, carrying heartache. An elderly maintenance worker sweeping the sidewalk noticed Ethan sitting alone, waiting for someone. Ethan nodded. My wife. The man rested both hands on the broom handle. She inside? Yes. The maintenance worker remained quiet before asking, did she do it? Ethan swallowed hard. I don't think so. The older man looked toward the prison walls. I've worked here 23 years. I've learned something. Ethan listened. Some people leave here guilty. Some leave innocent. But every single one leaves changed. The words struck Ethan with painful force. Even if Maya walked free tomorrow, she would never walk out as the same woman who had entered. There were losses that acquittal could never restore. As darkness settled over Chicago, Ethan started the engine and slowly drove away. For the first time in his life, he understood that redemption wasn't earned through regret. It had to be pursued through truth, accountability, and the willingness to face consequences, no matter how painful they became. And he was finally ready to begin. 6 weeks later, Rebecca Lawson's office was overflowing with evidence. Every new document exposed another piece of the deception. The cloned digital signatures, the altered server logs, the unauthorized software updates, the offshore companies linked to contractors Vanessa had personally recommended. Individually, each discovery raised suspicion. Together, they dismantled the entire case against Maya. Rebecca placed the final report inside a thick binder before walking into the federal prosecutor's office. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. When she finally emerged, she called Ethan. They're dismissing the charges. Ethan gripped the phone so tightly his hand began to shake. Today? Yes. The judge signed the order an hour ago. He closed his eyes. What about Maya? She's coming home. Rebecca paused before adding quietly, legally, she's free. But, emotionally. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Inside the correctional facility, Maya was organizing books in the library when a correctional officer approached. Ms. Caldwell. She turned. You have legal. Maya smiled politely. I'll be right there. Instead of leading her to the visitation room, however, the officer stopped outside the administration office. Rebecca stood inside holding several documents. Something about her expression felt different, lighter, hopeful. Maya, what happened? Rebecca smiled. The charges have been dismissed. For several seconds, Maya simply stared at her. What? The prosecution withdrew every count. They admitted the evidence was compromised. Maya didn't move. She had imagined this moment hundreds of times. In every version she cried, laughed, collapsed. Instead, she felt strangely quiet. Rebecca stepped closer. You're going home. The words echoed through the room. Going home. Home. The place she had dreamed about every night. The place that no longer felt as certain as it once had. When? Rebecca smiled. As soon as they finish processing your release. Only then did Maya's eyes begin filling with tears. Not because justice had finally arrived, because she had almost forgotten what hope felt like. Several inmates gathered around her after the announcement spread. Jasmine hugged her first. You did it. Maya smiled through tears. We did. Denise folded her arms. Don't forget us when you're famous. Maya laughed for the first time in months. I wasn't famous before I came here. You will be, after this story hits the news. Evelyn walked forward last. She embraced Maya without saying a word. Finally, she whispered, Remember what I told you your first night? Maya nodded. The truth and proving the truth aren't always the same thing. Evelyn smiled. You proved it. Maya looked around the room. I couldn't have survived this place without all of you. Denise shook her head. No. You survived because you decided prison wasn't going to decide who you became. Those words stayed with Maya as she packed the few belongings she had accumulated over the past several months. A notebook, several letters from Claire, a GED certificate Jasmine had proudly shown her after passing the exam. Small things, yet each carried memories no one outside those walls would ever fully understand. Outside the prison gates, reporters had already gathered. News traveled quickly. Television cameras lined the sidewalk. Microphones waited. So did Ethan. He stood beside his car, wearing the same navy blue coat he'd worn the day she was arrested. Only now, it hung loosely over a body that had grown noticeably thinner. His eyes searched the prison entrance without blinking. Then, the gates opened. Maya stepped outside carrying the same canvas duffel bag she had entered with months earlier. The morning breeze lifted strands of her hair. She stopped for a moment and closed her eyes. letting the sunlight rest against her face. Freedom. It felt different than she had imagined. Lighter and heavier. All at once. Camera shutters exploded. Reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Caldwell, do you plan to sue? Do you forgive your husband? Who do you blame?" Maya ignored every one of them. Her attention settled briefly on Ethan. He took one hesitant step toward her. "Maya." "Oh," his voice cracked. She looked into his eyes. For the first time since their marriage began, she saw no confidence there. Only remorse. He swallowed hard. "I was wrong." She remained silent. "I should have believed you." Silence. "I failed you." Still, she said nothing. Not because she wanted revenge. Because she no longer believed healing happened through dramatic conversations. Some wounds deserved honesty. Others deserved distance. Finally she spoke. "I waited every day." Her voice remained calm. "For my husband to come and tell me he knew I was innocent." Ethan lowered his head. "I know." But he never came. Those 6 words carried more pain than shouting ever could. "I was trying to find the truth." She looked at him steadily. "The truth was standing beside you for 10 years. Neither of them spoke again. After a long moment, Maya walked past him. No anger, no bitterness, just quiet resolve. Ethan didn't try to stop her. He understood that apologies offered after the damage is done are the beginning of accountability, not the end of it. Claire pulled her car to the curb a few yards away. The moment Maya climbed inside, Claire wrapped her in a long embrace. "I'm so sorry." Maya finally allowed herself to cry. Not because she was free, because someone believed her without needing proof. They drove away from the prison in silence. As the city skyline appeared in the distance, Claire asked softly, "Where do you want to go?" Maya looked out the window. "I don't want to go back to the penthouse." Claire nodded. "You can stay with us." "I don't want to be alone." "You won't be." For the first time since the nightmare began, Maya wasn't returning to the life she had left behind. She was beginning an entirely new one. Across the street, Ethan remained standing outside the prison gates long after every reporter had packed away their cameras. He watched the car disappear into traffic until it became impossible to see. Only then did he whisper the words he should have spoken months ago. "I believe you." But the woman who had needed to hear them had already driven away. And Ethan finally understood one of life's hardest lessons. The right word spoken too late can never undo the silence that came before them. The first morning outside prison should have felt like a celebration. Instead, Maya woke before sunrise, startled by the sound of a bedroom door closing somewhere down the hallway. Her heart raced. For one disorienting moment, she expected a correctional officer to announce morning count. Instead, she heard Claire humming softly in the kitchen downstairs. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the house. Maya sat upright in bed and looked around the guest room. Cream-colored walls, a wooden dresser, family photographs, a quilt Claire's grandmother had sewn years earlier. Everything was peaceful. Yet her body still behaved as though danger lived just outside the door. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and walked quietly downstairs. Claire looked up from the stove. "I was hoping the smell of pancakes might tempt you." Maya smiled faintly. "I haven't had homemade pancakes in a long time." "You've also barely eaten." "I'm trying." Claire walked over and hugged her gently. "You don't have to pretend you're okay here." Maya looked away. "I don't know how to be okay." Claire nodded. "You don't have to know yet." Those words settled into Maya's heart. For months, everyone inside the prison had counted days. Now she realized healing couldn't be measured the same way. Later that morning, Maya stood in Claire's backyard watching her young nephew chase bubbles across the grass. Every time one burst, he laughed as though nothing precious had been lost. Children, she thought, had a remarkable way of teaching resilience without ever intending to. Claire joined her with 2 mugs of tea. "What are you thinking about?" "How strange ordinary life feels." Claire smiled sadly. "It will stop feeling strange." "When?" "I don't know." She looked toward her son. "But one morning you'll realize you slept through the night. You'll laugh without feeling guilty. You'll stop looking over your shoulder every time someone says your name." Maya looked at her. "You really believe that?" "I believe healing happens quietly. Not all at once." Maya nodded slowly. She wanted to believe it too. Across town, Ethan entered Caldwell Capital for what would become one of the hardest meetings of his career. Every board member was present. So were the company's outside auditors. The atmosphere felt colder than he had ever experienced. The chairman folded his hands. "The criminal charges against Maya Caldwell have been dismissed." Ethan nodded. "I know. The media is asking difficult questions." "I expected that." The chairman slid a folder across the table. Our investors are asking even harder ones. Inside were letters from institutional shareholders. Some demanded Ethan's resignation. Others questioned whether Caldwell Capital had knowingly pursued a false investigation. One sentence appeared repeatedly. Leadership failed. The chairman spoke gently. Ethan. I know. No. The older man sighed. I don't think you do. You built this company. But a leader isn't judged only by success. He's judged by his judgment. The words cut deeply because they were true. For years, Ethan believed wisdom came from making the right financial decisions. Now he understood that wisdom also meant protecting innocent people from harmful ones. And in that responsibility, he had failed. That afternoon, Rebecca Lawson met Maya at a quiet neighborhood cafe. It was Maya's first time sitting in a public restaurant since her release. She instinctively chose the chair facing the entrance. Rebecca noticed. You like seeing the door. Maya looked embarrassed. I didn't realize I did that. Many people do after traumatic experiences. Maya wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. I keep expecting someone to tell me I have to go back. Rebecca's voice remained gentle. That fear won't disappear overnight. I know. I also don't recognize myself sometimes. What do you mean? I used to trust people so easily. She looked through the cafe window. Now I find myself questioning every stranger who looks at me. Rebecca nodded. That's a normal response. I don't want it to become my personality. It doesn't have to. How do I stop it? Rebecca smiled softly. You don't fight healing. You practice it. One honest conversation. One peaceful morning. One safe relationship at a time. Maya let those words settle. She had spent years helping other people rebuild their lives. Now she was learning how difficult that journey truly was. A few days later, Maya returned to the non-profit legal center. She stood outside the building for nearly 5 minutes before walking inside. The receptionist saw her first. Maya? Within seconds, attorneys, volunteers, and staff members gathered around her. No one applauded. No one treated her like a hero. Instead, one by one, they embraced her. The managing director stepped forward. We kept your office exactly the way you left it. Maya's eyes filled with tears. You didn't replace me. We never believed you needed replacing. She walked into her office. The same family photographs still sat on the bookshelf. Her favorite fountain pen rested beside an unopened notebook. A calendar remained turned to the month she had been arrested. Time seemed to have paused inside those walls. She slowly turned the calendar to the current month. Not because she wanted to erase the past, because she was finally ready to live in the present again. That evening, Ethan drove to his therapist's office for his first appointment. He almost turned the car around twice. Instead, he walked inside. Dr. Helen Morris welcomed him with a calm smile. What brings you here? Ethan laughed bitterly. How much time do you have? She smiled. We have 50 minutes. He sat quietly before finally speaking. I destroyed the person I loved most. What makes you believe that? I chose evidence over trust. Dr. Morris tilted her head thoughtfully. Did you choose evidence? Or certainty? He frowned. I'm not sure I understand. You've spent your entire career eliminating uncertainty. She leaned forward. In business, that's a strength. But relationships are different. Love requires the courage to sit with unanswered questions. Ethan stared at the floor. I've never been good at that. I know, she smiled kindly. That's why you're here. For the first time in many months, Ethan didn't leave a meeting with a strategy. He left with a mirror. And what he saw reflected back was not a billionaire, but an imperfect man who finally understood that becoming trustworthy often begins by admitting how deeply you've been mistaken. Spring arrived quietly. The snow melted from Chicago's sidewalks, trees slowly reclaimed their leaves, and neighborhoods that had looked lifeless only weeks before were filled with color again. Maya often found herself watching the seasons more carefully than she ever had before. Prison had taught her something she hadn't expected. Nothing stayed frozen forever. Not winter, not pain, not even grief. Some mornings still began with memories she wished she could forget. She would wake suddenly after dreaming about metal doors slamming shut. Sometimes, she caught herself counting footsteps in hallways without realizing why. Other times, she instinctively asked permission before entering rooms that belonged to no one but her. Those habits embarrassed her. Yet Rebecca had reminded her more than once that healing wasn't about pretending nothing had happened. It was about allowing new experiences to become stronger than old fears. One ordinary day at a time. The non-profit legal center had expanded its community outreach program after Maya returned. Every Saturday, Volunteers offered free legal workshops at neighborhood libraries and community centers. The goal wasn't simply to solve legal problems. It was to teach people how to avoid them. Knowledge, Maya believed, was one of the greatest forms of protection. That Saturday's workshop focused on tenant rights. More than 40 people attended. Young couples, retirees, college students, single parents. After the presentation ended, Maya remained behind answering questions. As the room gradually emptied, she noticed someone stacking chairs near the back wall. It was Daniel Brooks, the middle school history teacher she had briefly met months earlier outside the legal center. He smiled when he saw her. "I figured you could use an extra pair of hands." "I appreciate it." They folded chairs together in comfortable silence. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I heard you're back." "I am. I'm glad." His voice carried no pity, only sincerity. She appreciated that. "So," he asked, "how does it feel?" Maya considered the question. "Some days, I feel grateful. Some days, I feel like I'm learning how to exist again." Daniel nodded. "My wife used to say healing isn't climbing a ladder." She looked at him. "What is it?" "A spiral. You keep passing the same places. But every time you do, you're standing at a different height." Maya smiled. "I like that. I didn't come up with it." "You don't have to." For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was something peaceful about Daniel. He never rushed conversations. He never filled silence just because it existed. He allowed people room to think, room to breathe. It reminded Maya how exhausting constant tension had become. Later that afternoon, Daniel carried several boxes of donated books to his car. Maya helped him load the last one. "You volunteer here every weekend?" "Most weekends." "Why?" He closed the trunk gently. "After my wife passed away, I spent a long time believing grief was something to survive alone." He looked toward the community center. "One day, an elderly neighbor invited me to help organize donated school supplies." He smiled faintly. "I realized helping other people gave my own pain somewhere healthy to go." Maya listened carefully. He wasn't telling the story to gain sympathy. He was simply sharing a lesson life had taught him. "I'm sorry about your wife." "Thank you. It was 5 years ago." "Does it get easier?" Daniel thought for several seconds. "No," he answered honestly. "It becomes different. You stop asking life to give you back what you lost. You start learning how to honor it while still moving forward." His answer stayed with Maya long after they said goodbye. She realized both of them carried invisible scars. Neither expected the other person to erase them. There was something deeply comforting about that. Across the city, Ethan attended another therapy session. "I saw Maya today," he admitted. Dr. Helen Morris looked up from her notebook. "Did you speak?" "No." "Why not?" "I don't think I've earned that right." "Doctor," Morris leaned back. "What do you believe earning forgiveness looks like?" "I don't know. I used to think apologizing fixed things. And now? I know better." Silence settled between them. Finally, Dr. Morris asked, "What have you learned about yourself these past few months?" Ethan sighed. "I've spent my whole life believing certainty keeps people safe." She nodded. "And relationships? They don't work that way. What do they require?" He answered without hesitation. "Humility. Listening. The courage to admit I might be wrong." "Doctor," Morris smiled. "That's progress." "It doesn't feel like it." "Growth rarely does." She closed her notebook. "Most people confuse guilt with accountability." Ethan looked up. "What's the difference?" "Guilt focuses on how badly you feel." She paused. "Accountability focuses on what kind of person you become because of what you've done." Those words echoed inside Ethan for the rest of the day. For the first time, he stopped asking himself how to repair the past. Instead, he began asking how to deserve a better future. Several weeks later, Maya attended the graduation ceremony for 6 women who had completed the prison literacy program she started before her release. The correctional facility had invited her back as a guest speaker. Standing outside those familiar gates again made her heart race. She almost turned around. Then she remembered Rebecca's words. "Healing happens one safe step at a time." She walked inside. The women greeted her with tears and laughter. Jasmine proudly handed Maya a framed copy of her GED certificate. "You believed I could do this before I did." Maya hugged her tightly. "You did the hard work." "No." Jasmine smiled. "You reminded me I was still worth the effort." During her speech, Maya looked around the room. "I used to think freedom meant walking through those front gates." She glanced toward the windows where sunlight poured into the auditorium. "Now I understand something different." Freedom begins the moment you stop allowing your worst day to decide your entire future. The audience applauded quietly. Several correctional officers lowered their eyes. Even they understood the truth behind those words. That evening, Maya drove home beneath a sky painted orange by the setting sun. At a traffic light, she noticed Daniel waiting at the crosswalk, carrying groceries. She rolled down the passenger window. "Need a ride?" He laughed. "Only if you're sure." "I'm sure." As he climbed into the car, neither of them realized how ordinary the moment seemed. No dramatic music, no grand declaration, no instant romance. Just two imperfect people sharing the same road for a little while. Sometimes the strongest relationships don't begin with fireworks. They begin with kindness repeated often enough that trust quietly grows between two hearts that no longer need to pretend they have all the answers. The anonymous package arrived at Rebecca Lawson's office on a rainy Monday morning. There was no return address, no note. Only a plain brown envelope containing a flash drive and a single handwritten sentence. She hid everything in plain sight. Rebecca immediately called her lead investigator. Within an hour, the contents of the flash drive appeared on a conference room screen. Email archives, internal invoices, private calendar entries, deleted server logs. The deeper they looked, the more one name appeared. Vanessa Hart. Every file connected another piece of a puzzle that had once seemed impossible to solve. Rebecca picked up her phone. "Call the FBI Financial Crimes Task Force." Her investigator looked up. "You think we're there?" Rebecca nodded. "I think we've finally found the missing link." At Caldwell Capital, Ethan was preparing for another board meeting when two federal agents entered the lobby. His assistant hurried into the office. "There are agents here, asking for financial records." Ethan stood immediately. "Send them in." Special Agent Marcus Hale introduced himself before placing his credentials on the desk. "We're expanding the fraud investigation." Ethan nodded. "You'll have our full cooperation." "We appreciate that." The second agent opened a folder. "We're looking specifically into consultant access privileges." Ethan's heartbeat quickened. "Vanessa Hart." The agents exchanged a brief glance. "You've already started asking the right questions." For the next 2 hours, Ethan answered everything they asked. He handed over security logs, internal emails, access reports. Nothing was withheld. When the interview ended, Agent Hale paused at the office door. "Mr. Caldwell." "Yes?" "We've investigated financial fraud for more than 20 years." Ethan waited. The people responsible are rarely the loudest voices in the room. They're usually the calmest. Those words immediately brought Vanessa to mind. She had never shouted, never pressured him, never demanded anything. She had simply guided him, one reasonable suggestion at a time. Meanwhile, Maya had settled back into her work at the legal center. Her calendar was full again. Clients once more filled the waiting room. Yet she had changed in ways only those closest to her noticed. She no longer skipped lunch. She no longer answered work emails late into the night. Every Friday afternoon, she blocked 2 hours on her calendar with one simple word: breathe. One of the younger attorneys finally asked about it. "What does that meeting mean?" Maya smiled. "It's the most important appointment I keep." "You schedule time to rest?" "I schedule time to remember that my worth isn't measured by how exhausted I become." The attorney laughed. "I've never heard a lawyer say that." I hadn't either. Until life forced me to. The younger woman quietly opened her own calendar. Without saying another word, she blocked an hour for herself the following week. Maya noticed, but didn't comment. Some lessons are taught best through example. Later that afternoon, Daniel stopped by the legal center carrying a cardboard box. "I brought the books you asked for." Maya smiled. "You remembered?" "I teach middle school." He grinned. "Remember?" She laughed. "I should have known." They carried the books into the community classroom together. Most were children's history books, donated for an after-school reading program. Daniel looked around the room. "You've built something special here." "We're trying." "No." He shook his head gently. "You are." Maya looked at the shelves lined with donated books. "There were days in prison when I thought my career was over." "And now?" "Now I realize purpose doesn't disappear. Sometimes it just waits for us to find it again." Daniel smiled. "I think that's true." As they finished unpacking, he hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Would you like to get dinner sometime?" She looked at him for a long moment. Months earlier, the question would have filled her with panic. Now, it filled her with caution. Not fear, just caution. "I'd like that." She smiled gently. "But slowly." Daniel nodded without hesitation. "Slowly sounds good." His answer mattered more than the invitation. He wasn't asking her to hurry. He wasn't asking her to become someone she wasn't ready to be. He simply accepted the pace she needed. And for Maya, that felt safer than any promise. Across town, federal investigators executed a search warrant at Vanessa Hart's downtown condominium. Boxes of financial records were removed. Hard drives were seized. Luxury watches. Cash. Encrypted phones. By evening, every major news station interrupted programming. Breaking news. Federal investigation expands in Caldwell Capital fraud case. Employees gathered around televisions throughout the company's offices. Whispers spread from floor to floor. No one had expected the investigation to turn this direction. Especially not Vanessa. She stood in her living room watching agents catalog evidence. Her attorney leaned close. "Don't answer questions." She kept her eyes on the officers. "I wasn't planning to." "You understand the seriousness of this?" She smiled faintly. "I've understood it from the beginning." The attorney frowned. "What does that mean?" Vanessa looked out the window toward Chicago's skyline. "It means people usually underestimate how easily trust can be redirected." Those were the last words she spoke before agents escorted her from the apartment for questioning. That evening, Ethan sat alone inside the same penthouse where he and Maya had once planned their future. Everything felt different now. Not because the furniture had changed, because he had. His phone rang. It was Claire. "I just saw the news." "So did I." "How are you?" He looked around the silent apartment. "I don't know." Claire waited. "I keep thinking about the day Maya was arrested." His voice grew quieter. "I remember every chance I had to ask one more question. Every chance I had to stand beside her. And every chance I let fear speak first." Claire answered softly. "You can't relive that day." "I know. But you can decide what kind of man remembers it." After the call ended, Ethan walked to the bookshelf. Their wedding photograph still stood exactly where Maya had placed it years earlier. He picked it up carefully. For months, the picture had reminded him of everything he lost. Tonight, it reminded him of something else. The kind of husband he had once promised to become, and the long road still ahead if he ever hoped to become that man again, not for Maya, but because integrity demanded nothing less. By the end of the week, every major news outlet in the country was covering the story. The headlines that had once questioned Maya's integrity now told a very different story. Consultant accused of orchestrating multi-million-dollar fraud, wrongful prosecution under federal review. Caldwell Capital launches internal ethics investigation. For Maya, none of the headlines felt like victory. She read only one article before closing her laptop. Public opinion had changed. Her memories had not. There were still nights when she woke suddenly, convinced she had overslept for morning count. There were still moments when the sound of jangling keys made her shoulders tense. Freedom had returned. Peace was taking longer. Federal investigators uncovered months of carefully planned deception. Vanessa had created shell companies through intermediaries in 3 different states. She recruited outside contractors to manipulate cybersecurity systems. She cloned executive credentials. She altered digital signatures. Every step had been designed to point suspicion away from herself and towards someone whose reputation would make the accusations believable. Rebecca Lawson met with Maya to explain the latest developments. "They've confirmed everything." Maya listened quietly. "So it's over? The criminal case against you is..." Rebecca paused. "But your healing probably isn't." Maya smiled faintly. "I appreciate your honesty." Rebecca closed the file in front of her. "I've learned something from watching you." "What?" "Most people think resilience means pretending nothing hurts." She shook her head. "You taught me that resilience is telling the truth about the pain, without allowing it to define your future." Maya lowered her eyes. "I didn't feel resilient." "Most resilient people don't." Across town, Caldwell Capital's board of directors held an emergency meeting. Every seat around the long oak table was filled. The chairman looked directly at Ethan. "The federal investigation has cleared your wife." Ethan nodded. "I know. Our shareholders expect accountability." "I understand." The chairman slid a prepared statement across the table. "We're asking for your resignation as chief executive officer." Silence settled over the room. No one looked surprised, least of all Ethan. He picked up the letter and read it slowly. 15 years earlier, he had signed the incorporation documents that created Caldwell Capital. Now he was signing the document that ended his leadership. He reached for the pen. One board member spoke up. "You could fight this." Ethan shook his head. "No. You built this company. I also failed to protect it." He signed the letter. "I failed to protect the people inside it." The chairman stood and extended his hand. "I hope one day history remembers more than this mistake." Ethan accepted the handshake. "So do I." As he walked out of the boardroom carrying a single cardboard box containing family photographs, a few books and the coffee mug Maya had once given him, employees quietly stepped aside. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked away. No one applauded. No one celebrated. Consequences, Ethan realized, didn't always arrive with anger. Sometimes they arrived with silence. A few evenings later, Maya met Daniel for dinner at a small neighborhood restaurant overlooking the Chicago River. It wasn't expensive. Neither of them seemed to notice. They spent nearly 2 hours talking about books, teaching, history, and the children Daniel worked with every day. Not once did he ask her to relive prison. Not once did he ask whether she still loved Ethan. As they walked outside afterward, Daniel spoke carefully. "I've been wondering something." "What?" "People have probably been treating you differently." She laughed softly. "They either avoid mentioning prison, or it's the only thing they want to talk about." "I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize." She looked toward the river. "I just miss being ordinary." Daniel nodded. "I understand." "No, you probably don't." He smiled gently. "My wife had cancer." Maya looked at him. "After she passed away. If people stopped asking how I was, they started asking how I was doing after losing my wife." He shrugged. "Grief became my introduction." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. "I don't want prison to become mine." "It doesn't have to." He looked at her with quiet sincerity. "You're allowed to have chapters. You don't have to live in only one." For the first time in a long while, Maya smiled without effort. Not because the pain had disappeared, because someone had reminded her she was still becoming. Later that month, Ethan requested a meeting with Maya. He didn't ask through attorneys. He didn't send flowers. He wrote a handwritten letter. In it, he asked for nothing except the opportunity to apologize face to face, if she ever felt ready. Maya carried the letter in her purse for nearly a week before replying. Her response contained only one sentence. Saturday, 10 o'clock, Lincoln Park Conservatory. Saturday arrived cool and bright. The conservatory was quiet, filled with the scent of blooming orchids and warm sunlight filtering through glass ceilings. Ethan was already waiting when Maya entered. He stood immediately. "Thank you for coming." She nodded politely. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I've practiced this conversation 100 times. And every version sounded selfish." Maya remained still. "So, I'll only say what's true." He took a slow breath. "I was wrong. I failed to trust the person who had earned my trust. I confused evidence with certainty. And I made you pay for my fear." His voice trembled. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect another chance. I only wanted you to hear me say that without excuses." Maya looked at him for a long moment. "When I was in prison, I kept asking myself the same question." Ethan listened quietly. "I wasn't asking why Vanessa did what she did. I was asking why my husband stopped believing he knew my heart." Tears filled Ethan's eyes. "I don't have an answer good enough." "No." She nodded gently. "You don't." She stepped closer. "But I hope you keep looking." There was no anger in her voice. Only honesty. Sometimes, honesty is the greatest act of mercy one person can offer another. Maya turned to leave. Before she reached the doorway, Ethan spoke once more. "I hope you find happiness." She looked back with a quiet smile. "I hope you become the man you wanted me to believe you already were." Then, she walked into the sunlight. Ethan remained inside the conservatory long after she had gone. For the first time since losing everything, he understood that accountability wasn't measured by how sincerely you apologized. It was measured by the life you chose to live after the apology had been spoken. Summer arrived with long evenings and warm breezes drifting through Chicago's tree-lined streets. Nearly a year had passed since Maya walked out of prison. Her life no longer revolved around court hearings, interviews, or headlines. It revolved around ordinary things. Morning coffee on Claire's back porch, community legal workshops, phone calls with former inmates who were rebuilding their lives, Saturday visits to neighborhood libraries. Ordinary, she had discovered, was a gift many people never appreciated until they lost it. Every morning before opening the legal center, Maya paused beside a framed photograph hanging in the reception area. It showed volunteers helping families complete legal aid applications. No speeches, no awards, just people serving one another. Beneath the photograph hung a small plaque she had chosen herself. "Justice begins when someone is willing to listen." Every client who entered the building walked past those words. Many stopped to read them. Few realized they were also the words Maya repeated to herself every day. The legal center had grown beyond anything she imagined. Former clients now volunteered. Local attorneys donated their weekends. Teachers offered financial literacy classes. Counselors provided free mental health support. The mission was no longer simply solving legal problems. It was helping people rebuild confidence after life had knocked them down. One afternoon, a young man in his 20s arrived carrying a folder of court papers. "I don't know where to start," he admitted. Maya invited him into her office. "Start with your story." He looked embarrassed. "I made mistakes. We all have. I've been judged ever since." Maya smiled gently. Making a mistake and becoming one are two different things. The young man looked at her. "No one's ever said that to me." She handed him a notepad. "Let's work through this together." Outside her office, one of the younger attorneys watched quietly. Later that afternoon she asked, "How do you stay so patient?" Maya thought for a moment. "Because I know what it feels like to hope someone listens before deciding who you are." The attorney nodded. That answer stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Lessons taught through experience often reached people more deeply than lessons taught through words alone. Daniel continued volunteering every Saturday. Neither of them had rushed whatever was slowly growing between them. Some weekends they shared coffee after community events. Other weeks they spoke only briefly before returning to their own responsibilities. Neither kept score. Neither demanded more than the other was ready to give. One Saturday evening, they walked along the Chicago River as families filled the nearby parks. Daniel carried 2 cups of lemonade. "I still owe you for all the coffee you've bought me." Maya laughed. "I wasn't keeping track." "I know. Teachers like balanced accounts." She smiled. "Lawyers usually do too." They continued walking until they reached a bench overlooking the water. For several minutes, they simply watched the boats drift past. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Can I tell you something I've been afraid to say?" "You don't have to be afraid." "I know," he smiled. "But I am." She waited. "I care about you. I've cared about you for a while." He looked out at the river, instead of directly at her. "But I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything because I was kind to you." Maya's eyes softened. "You know what I appreciate most about you?" "What?" "You've never tried to rescue me." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's because you never needed rescuing. You needed room." Silence settled gently between them. Then Maya admitted something she hadn't said aloud before. "I was worried that if I ever cared about someone again." She paused. "I'd spend my life wondering when everything would fall apart." Daniel didn't rush to reassure her. Instead, he asked quietly, "What do you need when that fear shows up?" She thought carefully before answering. "Someone who won't tell me I'm being unreasonable." He smiled. "I can do that." She looked at him. "And what do you need?" He took a deep breath. "Sometimes, I still feel guilty for laughing." She frowned. "Why?" "Because part of me feels like moving forward means leaving my wife behind." Maya gently shook her head. "I don't think love works that way." "No? I think the people we truly love change us. They become part of who we are. Moving forward doesn't erase them. It honors what they gave us." Daniel looked at her with quiet gratitude. Neither reached for the other's hand. Neither made dramatic promises. They simply sat together beneath the evening sky, sharing a conversation honest enough to make silence feel safe. Across the city, Ethan's life looked almost unrecognizable. The penthouse had been sold months earlier. The luxury cars were gone. He now lived in a modest townhouse on a quiet street not far from Lincoln Park. Most mornings began before sunrise, not with stock market reports, with notebooks, coffee, and the small non-profit leadership program he had started after leaving Caldwell Capital. Twice each week, he mentored young entrepreneurs launching businesses focused on ethical leadership and community impact. During one workshop, a college student asked him, "What's the biggest mistake you ever made as a CEO?" The room grew still. Everyone expected a business answer, a failed investment, a bad acquisition. Instead, Ethan answered honestly, "I forgot that people are never just data." He paused. "I started believing evidence mattered more than relationships. And, by the time I realized my mistake." His voice softened. Someone I loved had already paid the price. The students remained silent. Finally, one young woman raised her hand. "If you could change one thing." He smiled sadly. "I'd ask one more question before reaching one more conclusion." After the workshop ended, several students stayed behind, not to discuss business, to thank him for being honest. For the first time in years, Ethan felt useful again. Not because he had all the answers, because he was willing to admit where he had gone wrong. That evening, Ethan received an email from the State Bar Association. They wanted to partner with Maya's legal center on a statewide initiative for people who had been wrongfully accused. He stared at the screen for a long time. Months earlier, he would have volunteered immediately. Now he understood that some opportunities belong to other people. He quietly forwarded the email to Maya with a brief note. I thought your team might be interested. No reply is necessary. I hope it helps the people you're serving. He pressed send, then closed the laptop. There was no expectation, no hidden request, just one small act that placed someone else's purpose ahead of his own. Sometimes growth isn't found in grand gestures. Sometimes it's found in finally learning that love, even after it ends, can still choose what is best for another person. Outside, the evening sun settled over Chicago, casting long golden reflections across the river. 3 lives that had once been connected by betrayal were now moving in different directions. None of them had become perfect, but each, in their own way, had become wiser. And wisdom, Maya often reminded her clients, is one of the few treasures that usually arrives only after we've paid a painful price to earn it. Autumn returned to Chicago almost exactly 2 years after the day Maya had walked through the prison gates, carrying nothing but a canvas duffel bag and a heart full of unanswered questions. The trees surrounding Lincoln Park glowed in shades of gold and crimson. Children chased falling leaves. Couples walked hand in hand. Joggers passed with headphones on, unaware of how many lives had quietly changed in the city around them. Life had not returned to what it once was. It had become something new, and, in many ways, something healthier. The non-profit legal center had expanded into a larger building. Above the entrance hung a simple sign, the Second Chance Justice Center. Inside, the walls displayed photographs of families reunited, students graduating, and volunteers serving meals during community outreach events. The center offered legal assistance, career counseling, financial literacy classes, and emotional support for people rebuilding their lives after wrongful convictions or devastating legal setbacks. One afternoon, Maya stood before a room filled with law students beginning their internships. She smiled as she welcomed them. Most people think justice begins inside a courtroom. She paused. I disagree. The room became quiet. Justice begins the moment someone decides another human being deserves to be heard before being judged. Several students wrote the sentence down. Maya noticed. Never forget something. She looked around the room. The law gives you authority. But compassion is a choice. If you lose your compassion, your knowledge will never be enough. When the orientation ended, one young intern stayed behind. What made you choose this kind of work? Maya smiled gently. Someone once judged me before listening. She glanced around the center. I promised myself no one who walked through these doors would ever experience that here. The young woman nodded thoughtfully. I hope I become that kind of lawyer. You can, Maya smiled. Just remember that every case file belongs to a real person. Later that evening, Daniel arrived carrying 2 paper bags from a neighborhood bakery. I brought cinnamon rolls. You remembered they're my favorite. I've learned a few things. She laughed. You have? Together they locked the office and walked toward the nearby river. Their conversations had become wonderfully ordinary. They debated history books, shared funny stories from work, compared terrible attempts at cooking new recipes. Neither tried to impress the other anymore. They simply showed up, consistently, kindly, honestly. As they reached the riverwalk, Daniel stopped. I've been thinking. Maya smiled. Should I be worried? Probably. She laughed. I was wondering. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small envelope. It wasn't a ring box. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Maya opened it. It contained a handwritten list. Things I promise. If we build a life together. I will listen before I assume. I will apologize without defending myself. I will never ask you to heal on my schedule. I will tell you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. I will never use your worst day to define who you are. I will choose us during ordinary days, not only difficult ones. Maya read every line twice. Tears gathered in her eyes. Daniel spoke softly. I don't think love is about promising perfection. I think it's about promising the habits that protect love. She folded the paper carefully. This, her voice trembled, is the most beautiful promise anyone has ever given me. Daniel smiled. I don't have a ring today. I'm not asking for an answer today. I just wanted you to know how I hope to love you. Maya looked at him with a smile that reached her eyes. The fact that you aren't rushing me is part of the answer. She reached for his hand. It was the first time she had done so. Neither of them hurried the moment. Some relationships begin with excitement. The strongest ones are often built with patience. Across town, Ethan stood before a classroom of young entrepreneurs during the final session of his leadership program. He looked nothing like the billionaire who had once appeared on magazine covers. His suits were simpler, his life quieter, his smile more genuine. A student raised his hand. "Mr. Caldwell, if success isn't measured by money anymore, how do you measure it?" Ethan thought for a long moment. Then he answered, "By the number of people who feel safe telling you the truth." The room became silent. I spent years surrounding myself with people who agreed with me. I should have surrounded myself with people willing to challenge me. He smiled sadly. Power becomes dangerous when nobody feels comfortable asking whether you're wrong. Another student asked, "Do you regret losing your company?" "I regret losing my integrity long before I lost my company." He looked around the classroom. Companies can be rebuilt. So can careers. But trust, he paused. Trust is earned one decision at a time. When the session ended, several students remained behind to thank him. One young man said quietly, "You've taught us more about leadership through your mistakes than most people teach through their successes." Ethan smiled. Then maybe those mistakes can still accomplish some good. Several weeks later, the city hosted an annual Community Service Awards banquet. Organizations from across Chicago gathered to celebrate volunteers making a difference. The Second Chance Justice Center received the award for outstanding community impact. When Maya walked onto the stage, she was surprised to see Ethan seated near the back of the ballroom as a guest of another nonprofit. For a brief moment, their eyes met. This time, neither looked away. After the ceremony ended, Ethan waited until the crowd had thinned before approaching. "Congratulations. Thank you. You've built something extraordinary." "We've built it." She smiled. "It took a lot of people." He nodded. "I'm glad." There was a peacefulness between them now that hadn't existed before, not because the past had disappeared, because neither of them was pretending it hadn't happened. "I read about your leadership program," Maya said. "The students seem to love it. I hope they become better leaders than I was." She looked at him thoughtfully. "I think they will, because you're teaching them something you had to learn the hard way." He smiled. "I suppose I am." After a brief silence, Ethan spoke again. "I wanted to thank you." She looked surprised. "For what?" "For refusing to let my failure become your future." She looked toward the busy ballroom. "I almost did. But then I realized something." "What?" "The people who hurt us should never get to decide the rest of our story." Ethan nodded slowly. "I'll remember that." They shook hands. No dramatic reunion. No renewed romance. Only two people acknowledging the truth with honesty and respect. As they walked in opposite directions, neither carried anger anymore. Only gratitude for the lessons they had paid dearly to learn. Months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Maya and Daniel returned to the Riverwalk, where he had first given her the handwritten promises. This time, he carried a small velvet ring box. He smiled nervously. "I think I'm finally ready to ask." She laughed. "I've been ready to answer." He knelt on one knee. "Maya Caldwell." He stopped and smiled. "I guess that name doesn't fit anymore." She laughed through happy tears. "It hasn't fit for a while." He took a deep breath. "Maya Williams, will you keep choosing this ordinary, honest, imperfect life with me?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she remembered the prison gates, the courtroom, the sleepless nights, the fear, the healing, the friendships, the forgiveness, everything that had brought her here. Then she smiled. "Yes. Not because you've promised me a perfect future, but because you've shown me a trustworthy present." He slipped the ring onto her finger. Around them, life continued. Children laughed. Leaves drifted across the path. The river flowed steadily toward tomorrow. And somewhere beneath the same autumn sky, Ethan closed another leadership workshop by repeating the lesson that had forever changed his own life. Never let fear make a decision that love deserves the chance to answer. Because in the end, this was never a story about a billionaire losing his fortune. It was a story about three imperfect people discovering that real love is not measured by wealth, grand gestures, or second chances. It is measured by honesty, by accountability, by patience, and by the quiet courage to become a better person than yesterday. Sometimes justice wins in a courtroom. Sometimes healing wins in the heart. And sometimes the happiest ending isn't finding the life you once imagined. It's becoming the person who can finally build a healthier one. If this story touched your heart, let its lessons stay with you long after this video ends. Tell me in the comments, which character changed the most? Maya, Ethan, or Daniel, and why? I genuinely love to read your thoughts, because every viewer takes away something different from this journey. If this story reminded you that trust is precious, forgiveness is powerful, and real love is built on honesty rather than perfection, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone you care about. You never know who might need this message today. And if you're new to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next inspiring American love story filled with powerful life lessons, unforgettable characters, and emotional journeys that stay with you long after the final chapter. Until next time, remember this: the strongest relationships aren't built by two perfect people. They're built by two imperfect people who choose truth over pride, patience over pressure, and love over fear every single day. Thank you for watching, take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.